I came home from a 3-day trip to find my house colder than a grave and my 7-year-old granddaughter locked in a freezing tool shed like an animal. On the refrigerator, a note from my son-in-law read simply, "We are traveling to Hawaii. She is your problem now. Figure it out." My granddaughter wasn't crying when I found her. She was shivering, turning blue, and holding a rusty metal box. She looked up at me and whispered, "I found this. Grandma said to keep it safe from Daddy." That box didn't just contain secrets. It contained the ammunition I needed to destroy the people who did this. Before I tell you what was inside, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe family isn't about blood, but about who stays when it gets cold. My name is Ezekiel Freeman, and at 70 years old, most people look at me and see a retired railroad engineer living out his final days in a quiet house in Georgia. They see the calloused hands, the slow walk, and the silence. They assume I am harmless. They assume I have nothing left to give and even less to take. My son-in-law Gavin certainly thought so. He called me simple behind my back, mocking the way I saved bacon grease or fixed my own roof. My daughter Latoya thought so too. She treated my wallet like her personal inheritance fund, waiting impatiently for me to expire so she could cash out. But they forgot one thing. Before I was a grandfather, I was a man who laid steel tracks through mountains that didn't want to yield. I know how to build, and I know how to destroy. And when I walked into my home that Tuesday afternoon, I realized it was time to start destroying. The first thing that hit me was the silence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty house. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed against my ears. I had been away for 3 days at my cabin near the lake, checking on the timberland I had bought 40 years ago, a property Gavin called a waste of dirt. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, expecting the warmth of the central heating to greet me. Instead, I saw my breath fog in the air. The house was freezing. It was mid-January and the temperature outside had dropped to 20 degrees, yet the inside of my home felt just as biting. I dropped my duffel bag and walked to the thermostat in the hallway. It had been turned off completely. Not turned down, but off. It was a petty, calculated move. Gavin always complained about my utility bills, claiming I wasted money on heat even though I paid every single bill in this house. But turning it off when they knew I was coming home felt like a specific kind of spite. I turned the system back on, hearing the furnace groan to life in the basement, but the chill in my bones didn't leave. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The family photos lining the wall, the ones of my late wife Odessa and me from our wedding, the ones of Latoya graduating, the ones of Tiana as a baby they had been tampered with. Every picture frame featuring Odessa or me had been turned face down against the wall. Some were tilted as if struck by a passing hand. One frame, a beautiful portrait of Odessa in her Sunday hat, lay shattered on the floor, the glass dusted over the hardwood. I knelt down, my knees popping with age, and picked up the photograph. The glass didn't break by accident. It had been smashed in the center, right over Odessa's face. This wasn't just negligence. This was hatred. I stood up, clutching the photo, and felt a cold rage begin to simmer in my chest. I walked into the living room. The furniture was covered in dust sheets, as if the house had been abandoned for months, not days. The TV was unplugged. The curtains were drawn tight. It looked like a house prepared for a foreclosure or a funeral. I called out for them. Latoya, Gavin, Tiana. My voice echoed off the walls, flat and unanswered. I checked the bedrooms. Latoya and Gavin's room was a disaster zone of rejected clothes and empty hangers, signs of a frantic packing job. The closet doors were thrown open, revealing empty spaces where their expensive coats and luggage used to be. I went to Tiana's room. Her bed was made perfectly smooth, too smooth. Her favorite teddy bear was missing. Her closet was open, but her clothes were still there. All of them. Her winter coat was hanging on the rack. Panic, sharp and sudden, pierced through my anger. If they had left, where was the child? They wouldn't take her without her coat. Not in this weather. I moved to the kitchen, my boots heavy on the linoleum floor. The kitchen was stripped bare. The coffee maker was gone. The toaster was gone. Even the fruit bowl that usually sat on the island was missing. It was as if locusts had swept through the property. And then I saw it. A single piece of yellow notebook paper taped to the stainless steel refrigerator door. It fluttered slightly as the heating vents kicked in. I walked over and ripped it down. The handwriting was jagged and rushed, undoubtedly Gavin's. I read the words once, then twice, my brain refusing to process the cruelty of the ink. "We are traveling to Hawaii for a month. We need a break. Tiana is your problem now. Figure it out. Don't call us." I stared at the note. Hawaii. They had flown to a tropical paradise while leaving my house to freeze. But the part that made my hands shake wasn't the vacation. It was the sentence, "Tiana is your problem now." Where was she? I had checked her room. She wasn't there. I ran to the back door, shouting her name. "Tiana! Tiana! Baby, where are you?" The backyard was covered in a thin layer of frost. The swing set stood empty, the chains swaying in the biting wind. There was no sign of her. I checked the garage. Empty. Gavin's car was gone, which meant they had driven to the airport. I checked the guest room. Empty. A terrible thought gripped me. Had they left her at a neighbor's house? No, Gavin and LaToya didn't speak to the neighbors. They thought they were better than everyone on this block. Had they dropped her off at a shelter? My chest tightened. I was about to call 911 when I heard it. It was a sound so faint I almost missed it over the wind. A rhythmic, dull thumping. Thump, thump, pause, thump. It was coming from the bottom of the garden near the old tool shed. That shed was a dilapidated structure made of rotting wood and rusted tin sheets. I hadn't used it in years, ever since I built the new garage. It was dangerous, filled with sharp tools and spiders, and I had expressly forbidden Tiana from ever going near it. I had padlocked it 2 years ago to keep her safe. I ran. For a man of 70 with bad knees, I moved with the speed of a desperate father. I crossed the frozen lawn, slipping on the icy grass, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. As I got closer, I saw the padlock. It wasn't locked. It was hanging off the latch, broken, as if someone had forced it open and then jammed it shut again from the outside with a stick. The thumping noise stopped as my footsteps approached. I grabbed the piece of wood jammed into the handle and yanked it free. I threw the door open. The smell hit me first, the scent of old oil-damp wood and freezing decay. It was dark inside, the only light coming from the gray afternoon sky behind me. Tiana. I choked out her name. In the far corner, nestled between a rusted lawnmower and a stack of old tires, was a small pile of dirty drop cloths. The pile moved. I rushed forward and fell to my knees, pulling the rough, oily fabric away. There she was. My 7-year-old granddaughter was curled into a tight ball, her knees pulled to her chest. She was wearing only her thin cotton pajamas and one sock. Her lips were a terrifying shade of violet. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. She wasn't crying. She was shaking so violently that her teeth chattered with a sound that clicked like a clock ticking down seconds. Oh God, Tiana. I scooped her up. She felt like a block of ice. Her body was stiff. She looked at me with eyes that seemed glazed and distant, huge in her small face. She didn't reach for me. She didn't say Grandpa. She just stared as if she wasn't sure I was real. I unzipped my heavy down jacket and wrapped it around her, pulling her against my chest to share whatever body heat I had left. I rubbed her back, her arms trying to get blood flowing. How long, I whispered, tears freezing on my cheeks. How long have you been here, baby? She didn't answer immediately. She struggled to move her arm, which was tucked tightly against her stomach. At first, I thought she was injured. I thought maybe Gavin had hit her. But she was protecting something. Slowly, with trembling fingers that looked blue at the tips, she pulled an object from beneath her pajama shirt. It was a small, heavy metal box. The paint was chipped, revealing the dark iron beneath. It was a strong box, the kind people used 50 years ago to keep deeds and cash safe from fire. I recognized it instantly. It belonged to Odessa. It was the box she used to keep her special recipes and her grandmother's locket in. I hadn't seen it in 5 years, not since the day she died. I thought it had been lost or that LaToya had pawned it long ago. Tiana held it out to me. Her voice was a dry rasp, a whisper that sounded like dry leaves scraping together. Daddy put me in here, she stammered, her jaw locking up between words. He said I was bad. He said, you would find me when you got back. He said, if I was lucky, I wouldn't freeze before you came. I felt a murderous rage, so pure, so white-hot that for a second I couldn't see. Gavin hadn't just left her, he had imprisoned her. He had locked a child in an uninsulated shed in freezing temperatures with no food, no water, and no coat. This wasn't abandonment. This was attempted murder. He expected the cold to do what he didn't have the guts to do himself, but Tiana wasn't done. She pushed the box into my hands. Her eyes cleared for a moment, showing a spark of intelligence that reminded me so much of my wife. I found this, she whispered. It was under the floorboards, under the tires. Grandma told me, in my dream, she told me to look. She said, keep it safe from Daddy. Daddy wants the papers, but Grandma hid them. I looked down at the box. It was heavy. It rattled slightly. I realized then that Gavin and LaToya hadn't just gone to Hawaii for a vacation. They were celebrating. They thought they had won. They thought they had disposed of the burden of a child and the burden of an old man. They thought I was just a senile retired engineer with a small pension and a crumbling house. They had no idea what was in this box. They had no idea that Odessa, my brilliant, beautiful Odessa, had been playing a game of chess with them from beyond the grave. I picked Tiana up in my arms, clutching the box in one hand and my granddaughter in the other. I carried her out of that freezing hell and toward the house. I wasn't going to call the police yet. Not yet. Police meant social services. Police meant Tiana going into the system while investigations happened. Number one, I needed to warm her up. I needed to feed her. And then I needed to open this box. Because if Tiana was right, if this box contained what I thought it contained, Gavin and LaToya weren't just going to jail. They were going to lose everything they thought they owned. They were currently flying first class over the Pacific Ocean, drinking champagne, thinking they were untouchable. They didn't know that they had just handed me the weapon that would shoot them out of the sky. I walked into the house, kicked the door shut, and carried Tiana to the fireplace. I was going to burn every piece of wood I had to keep her warm, and then I was going to burn my son-in-law's life to the ground. I carried Tiana into the living room and settled her onto the rug in front of the roaring fireplace. I wrapped 3 thick wool blankets around her small frame until she looked like a little cocoon. Her teeth had finally stopped chattering, but her eyes were still wide and vacant, staring into the flames as if she could still see the darkness of that shed. I made her drink a mug of warm broth, watching her trembling hands clutch the ceramic like a lifeline. Once her breathing steadied and her eyelids began to droop from sheer exhaustion, I knew I had a small window of time. I needed to see exactly what had happened. I needed to witness the crime. Gavin and LaToya thought I was an old fool. They thought I was just a retired railroad man who spent his days whittling wood and staring at the lake. They didn't know that 3 years ago, after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood, I had installed a high-definition security system. I didn't hire a company. I did it myself. I hid the cameras in the birdhouses, in the eaves of the roof, and deep within the ventilation grates. The server was tucked away behind a false panel in my study, a room Gavin rarely entered because he said it smelled like old people. I walked into the study and locked the door. I sat down at my desk and woke up the monitor. My fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up the footage from 2 days ago. I found the timestamp. Tuesday, 4 p.m. The video loaded and the image on the screen was crisp and horrifyingly clear. I watched as the back door flew open. Gavin marched out first. He was wearing his expensive camel hair coat and designer sunglasses, looking every bit the tech investor he pretended to be. He was dragging Tiana by the arm, not leading her, dragging her. Her feet were sliding on the frosted grass. She was trying to dig her heels in her little pink sneakers, leaving trails in the frost. She wasn't wearing a coat, just those thin pajamas. I turned up the volume. The microphone I had installed near the patio picked up his voice over the wind. "Move, you little brat," Gavin snarled. "You are blocking my blessing. I am not missing this flight because you cannot find your shoes." "But Daddy..." "It is cold," Tiana cried. Her voice was thin and terrified. "Please let me get my coat." "I do not care," Gavin shouted. He yanked her so hard she stumbled and fell onto her knees on the frozen ground. He didn't help her up. He dragged her through the dirt. "You are a burden. You have always been a burden. Your grandfather can deal with you. If he does not come back in time, well, that is just natural selection, isn't it?" My fist clenched so hard around the mouse that I heard the plastic crack. I watched as he hauled her to the shed. He threw the door open and shoved her inside with the force you would use to discard a bag of trash. Tiana tried to run back out, reaching for him, pleading. Gavin kicked the door shut. I saw him grab a piece of scrap wood from the ground and jam it into the latch, trapping her inside. Then I saw the part that broke whatever was left of my heart. The camera angle shifted to the back porch. My daughter LaToya was standing there. She was wearing a white fur coat and holding a glass of wine. She wasn't looking at Tiana. She wasn't looking at Gavin. She was looking at her reflection in the sliding glass door, fixing her lipstick. She watched her husband lock her 7-year-old daughter in a freezing shed, and she didn't even flinch. She took a sip of wine, checked her watch, and walked back inside to get her luggage. They were monsters. They were demons wearing human skin. I shut off the monitor. I had seen enough. The video was saved to the cloud and to 3 separate external hard drives. I had the evidence of child endangerment and abandonment, but I knew this was just the beginning. The note on the fridge said they were going to Hawaii. That meant money, lots of it. I left the study and walked down the hall to the master bedroom. This room had been a shrine to Odessa since she passed. I kept it clean, but I rarely slept in there anymore, preferring the guest room. It felt too big without her. I walked straight to the walk-in closet. Behind the rows of Odessa's Sunday dresses, which I could never bring myself to pack away, was a wall safe. It was a heavy-duty model bolted into the studs. When I pushed aside the dresses, my stomach dropped. The safe wasn't just open. It had been butchered. The digital keypad had been smashed, and the door had been pried open with what looked like a crowbar and a sledgehammer. The steel was bent and scarred. They must have worked on it for hours. I looked inside. It was empty. The stack of emergency cash I kept, about $5,000, was gone. That was money for repairs, for emergencies for Tiana. But that wasn't what made my knees weak. I reached into the back of the dark metal box. The velvet pouch was gone. Odessa's jewelry. Her pearl necklace from our 30th anniversary. The diamond earrings I bought her when I got my pension payout. And her engagement ring, the ring I had worked double shifts for 2 years to buy in 1974. The ring she had worn every single day until she died. They took it. They took her memory. They took the only things I had left of the woman who built this life with me. They didn't take them because they wanted to wear them. LaToya always called Odessa's taste old-fashioned. They took them to pawn them. They took them to turn my wife's legacy into quick cash for a vacation. I stood there in the closet surrounded by the faint scent of Odessa's lavender perfume and felt a tear, hot and angry, slide down my cheek. I wiped it away instantly. This was not the time for grief. This was the time for war. As I stepped out of the closet, my cell phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text alert from the bank. Chase fraud alert. A charge of $15,000 was just attempted at the Four Seasons Maui Resort. Card ending in 4098. If this was you, reply yes. If not, reply no. The card ending in 4098. That was the emergency credit card I had given LaToya 5 years ago when Tiana was born. I told her it was for diapers, for formula, for doctor visits. I told her never to use it for anything else. I had a limit on it, but I had raised it last year when LaToya claimed she needed to pay for Tiana's dental surgery. A surgery that I now realized probably never happened. $15,000. They were booking a presidential suite. They were flying first class. They were drinking champagne and eating lobster while their daughter was freezing to death in a shed with rats and spiders. They were spending my money, my savings, my blood and sweat to celebrate their freedom from their own child. I looked at the phone screen. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I could stop it right now. I could reply no and freeze the card. They would be humiliated at the front desk. It would be satisfying. But no, that was too easy. That was a slap on the wrist. I didn't want to slap them. I wanted to crush them. I wanted them to check in. I wanted them to get comfortable. I wanted them to order room service and open the minibar. I wanted them to feel like kings and queens. Because the higher they climbed, the harder the fall would be when I cut the cable. I put the phone back in my pocket without replying. Let the charge go through. It would be just another line item in the indictment. I went back to the living room. Tiana was asleep, her breathing shallow but rhythmic. I needed to make 2 phone calls. The first one was to Dr. Sterling. He was not just my doctor, he was an old friend, a man who had stitched up my hand when I sliced it on a saw and who had treated Odessa with dignity until the end. I dialed his private number. He answered on the second ring. "Zeke," he said, sounding surprised. "Is everything all right?" "No," I said, my voice steady and cold as steel. "I need you to come to the house. Bring your medical bag. And bring a camera." "Zeke, what is going on?" "I found Tiana locked in the shed. She has been there for days. Hypothermia, dehydration, bruising. I need a full medical report, Sterling. I need it documented. I need pictures of every bruise, every frostbite mark. I need a paper trail that no lawyer on earth can argue with." There was a silence on the other end, then the sound of keys jingling. "I am on my way, Zeke. I will be there in 10 minutes. I hung up and dialed the second number. This was the call that would seal their fate. I called the offices of Harrison and Associates. Mrs. Harrison was the kind of lawyer who didn't go to court to argue, she went to court to hunt. She had handled my land deals in the 80s, protecting my property when developers tried to swindle me. She was expensive, she was ruthless, and she terrified most men. She answered immediately. She knew my number. "Ezekiel," she said, her voice like gravel wrapped in silk. To what do I owe the pleasure? I need you to open a file, I said. Is this about the land deal? No, I said. This is personal. I need you to prepare a lawsuit. But not just a lawsuit. I need restraining orders. I need emergency custody filings. I need forensic accountants. I need you to freeze assets. I need you to contact the district attorney. Ezekiel, slow down, she said, her tone shifting from casual to sharp. What are we dealing with? My daughter and her husband tried to kill my granddaughter, I said. And they stole everything Odessa left me. They are in Hawaii right now spending it. There was a pause, a long, heavy pause. Then I heard the sound of a pen clicking. I am listening, she said. Mrs. Harrison, I said, looking at the fire where Tiana slept. I do not want a settlement. I do not want mediation. I want a massacre. I want them to land in Atlanta with nothing but the handcuffs on their wrists. Can you do that? I heard a low chuckle on the other end. Ezekiel, she said, by the time I am done with them, they will wish the plane had crashed. I hung up the phone. I looked at the metal box on the floor. It was time to see what Odessa had left me. It was time to reload. I sat on the worn hardwood floor with the fire crackling behind me and the heavy metal box in my lap. Tiana was finally asleep, her breathing deep, and even though every few minutes she would twitch as if her dreams were dragging her back to the cold darkness of the shed. I ran my thumb over the rusted latch of the box. Odessa had kept this hidden for a reason. She was a woman who never spoke a word without meaning it and never hid a thing without fearing it. I did not need a key. The lock was old and brittle. I took the fire poker and wedged the tip under the lid. With a sharp snap of metal giving way to force, the box popped open. I expected to find cash. I expected to find the few gold coins my father had given me or perhaps savings bonds. But the box was filled with papers. Old yellowing papers that smelled of cedar and thyme. I lifted the first stack. It was a property deed. Specifically, it was the deed to 50 acres of scrubland I had purchased back in 1982. I bought it for pennies on the dollar because nobody wanted it. It was rocky, full of clay, and impossible to farm. Gavin hated that land. Every Thanksgiving he would make a joke about Ezekiel's dirt patch or ask me why I did not just sell it to the county for a landfill. He called it dead earth. He said I was holding on to garbage because I was too stubborn to admit I made a bad investment. I unfolded the deed. Beneath it was a map. It was not an old survey map. It was a modern, high-resolution topographical printout dated just 6 months ago. I adjusted my glasses, squinting in the firelight. Across the center of my 50 acres, someone had drawn thick red lines. In the corner of the document was the logo of a massive technology conglomerate, one of those companies that runs the internet. Stamped across the bottom were the words, Proposed Site Alpha, Future Data Center. My hands started to shake, but not from age. I knew what this meant. I had read about it in the papers. The state was zoning new areas for artificial intelligence data centers, massive facilities that needed solid bedrock and isolation. They were buying land for 10, maybe 20 times its market value. Gavin called it dead earth, but Odessa knew the truth. This was not just dirt. This was a gold mine. This was generational wealth. This was the kind of money that changed a family name from a footnote to a legacy. The land I bought for $20,000 was likely worth $5, maybe $10 million today. I realized then why Gavin had been so desperate to get power of attorney. He did not care about my pension. He did not care about this house. He wanted the land. He knew. Somehow he knew about the zoning before it went public. He wanted to sell it cash out and leave me with nothing. But Odessa must have found out. She must have intercepted the mail or overheard a phone call. She hid the deed. She hid the map. She put them in the only place she knew he would never look, a rusty box in a shed he was too lazy to clean. I dug deeper into the box. Beneath the map was a notebook. It was a simple spiral-bound notebook, the kind kids use in school. I opened it. The pages were filled with ink, but it was not Odessa's neat cursive handwriting. It was a jagged, aggressive scrawl. I recognized it immediately. It was Gavin's handwriting. I stared at the page, my stomach turning over. It was covered in signatures. My signature. Ezekiel Freeman. Ezekiel Freeman. Ezekiel Freeman. Line after line, page after page. He had been practicing. He was trying to perfect the loop of the E and the sharp angle of the F. He wasn't just planning to ask me for the land. He was planning to steal it. I turned the page. There was a drafted letter of sale, handwritten, dated 4 months ago. It was an agreement to sell the 50 acres to a shell company I had never heard of for a fraction of the real value. The signature at the bottom was mine, but I had never signed it. It was a forgery. A good one, but a forgery nonetheless. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind. Gavin had tried to sell the land behind my back. He must have set up the deal, forged my signature, and tried to push it through. But something must have stopped him. A notary. A title search. Someone must have demanded to see me in person, or demanded a fingerprint, or flagged the signature. He failed. He failed to steal it with a pen, so he decided to steal it by removing the owner. He was not just a thief. He was a clumsy, desperate amateur playing a game he did not understand. He thought he could outsmart the system, and when the system blocked him, he turned to violence. He decided that if he could not forge my name, he would just become my heir. And to do that, I had to die. And Tiana, poor sweet Tiana, was the only witness to his failure. She must have seen him practicing. She must have seen the papers. That was why he hated her. That was why he threw her in the shed. She was a loose end. I felt a movement beside me. I looked down. Tiana was awake. Her big brown eyes were open, reflecting the dancing flames of the fireplace. She looked small and fragile, but her gaze was steady. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the orange prescription bottle sitting on the side table next to my reading chair. It was my heart medication, digoxin. I took it every morning to keep my rhythm steady. "Grandpa," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, hurting from the cold, dry air. "I am here, baby," I said, stroking her hair. "You are safe." "Did you eat the candy?" she asked. I frowned. "What candy, Tiana?" "The white candy," she said. "Daddy put it in your bottle. He took your pills out and put the candy in. He said it was a special treat for you. He told Mommy that after you ate the candy, you would sleep for a long, long time. He said you would sleep forever, and we would be rich." The air left my lungs as if I had been punched in the gut. I looked at the orange bottle. I hadn't taken my pill this morning because I had been rushing to get home from the cabin. I grabbed the bottle. My hands were trembling violently now. I popped the cap and poured the small white tablets into my palm. They looked like my pills. They were small, round, and white. But when I looked closer, holding them up to the firelight, I saw the difference. My digoxin pills had a tiny inscription on one side, a code from the manufacturer. These pills were smooth. They were blank. I brought one to my nose. It smelled faintly of almonds and chalk. I touched the tip of my tongue to one. It was sweet. It wasn't medicine. It was sugar. Or maybe it was rat poison pressed into a mold. Or maybe it was simply nothing a placebo meant to let my heart fail on its own. Gavin hadn't just abandoned me. He had actively sabotaged my lifeline. He knew I had a heart condition. He knew that if I missed 3 or 4 doses, I would go into cardiac arrest. He had swapped my medication. He expected me to come home, find the house empty, get stressed, take my pill to calm my heart, and get nothing but sugar while my heart seized up and stopped. He wanted me to die of natural causes. An old man, a cold house, a bad heart. It would look like a tragedy, not a murder. The perfect crime. No bullets, no poison, just the absence of the medicine that kept me alive. I clenched my fist around the fake pills, crushing them into powder. He wanted me to sleep forever. He wanted to erase me so he could sign his name on that deed and sell my legacy for a quick payout. Tiana sat up, the blanket falling from her shoulders. She looked at the white powder in my hand. "He is a bad man, Grandpa," she said. Her voice didn't sound like a 7-year-old child anymore. It sounded like an old soul who had seen too much darkness. Grandma hid the papers because she knew. She told me to watch him. I pulled Tiana into my arms and held her tight. I buried my face in her hair, smelling the smoke from the fire and the lingering scent of the cold. I realized then that Odessa hadn't just left me land. She had left me a soldier. Tiana had saved my life. If she hadn't told me about the box, I never would have found the deed. If she hadn't told me about the pills, I would have taken one tomorrow morning and likely died within the week. My grief for my wife transformed into a cold, hard resolve. They had tried to kill us, not just with neglect, but with calculation. They were murderers in everything but the final act. I stood up, lifting Tiana with me. I walked to the kitchen and grabbed a large Ziploc bag. I poured the fake pills into it and sealed it tight. This was evidence. This was attempted murder. Then I went back to the box and took out the deed and the notebook with the forged signatures. The doorbell rang. It was sharp and loud in the silent house. I checked the clock. It was almost midnight. Who would be coming here now? I went to the door, checking the peephole. It was Dr. Sterling. He had his medical bag in one hand and a camera in the other. He looked pale and worried. I opened the door. He stepped in, bringing a gust of cold wind with him. He looked at me, then at Tiana wrapped in blankets on the sofa. "Zeke," he said, his voice tight. "I got here as fast as I could." "What happened?" I handed him the bag of white pills. "Don't touch them with your bare hands," I said. "Gavin swapped my heart meds. Tiana says he told her they would make me sleep forever." Sterling's eyes went wide. He took the bag, looking at the pills through the plastic. "These aren't digoxin," he whispered. "They look like... Zeke, these look like pure caffeine pills, or maybe cyanide tablets pressed to look like medicine. If you took these with your heart condition, I would be dead before I hit the floor," I finished. Sterling looked at Tiana, then back at me. His face hardened. He set his bag down on the table and took out his stethoscope. "Show me the girl," he said. "We are going to document everything, and then I am going to call the toxicology lab." I nodded. "Do it. I want every bruise recorded. I want every pill analyzed." As Sterling began to examine Tiana, gently checking her frostbitten fingers and listening to her lungs, I walked over to the window and looked out at the dark driveway. I imagined Gavin and LaToya on their plane, soaring over the ocean, thinking they were free. They were probably toasting to my death right now. Let them toast. Let them drink. Because when they landed, they weren't going to find a dead old man and a frozen child. They were going to find a war they never expected. I wasn't just going to sue them, I was going to bury them. I picked up the phone. It was time for the next step. I needed to lock them out of their own lives before their plane even touched the tarmac. It was time to introduce them to the consequences of their actions. I dialed the number for the bank's fraud department. It was late, but for a high-net-worth client which I was about to reveal myself to be, they would answer. The operator picked up. "This is Ezekiel Freeman," I said. "I want to report a theft, and I want to freeze everything." While my granddaughter slept under the watchful eye of Dr. Sterling, and the forensic camera flashed, recording every bruise on her skin 30,000 feet above us, Gavin and LaToya were living in a fantasy world. I could imagine it perfectly because I knew them. I knew their greed. I knew their arrogance. They were sitting in first class sipping champagne that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Gavin would be stretching out his legs in the lie-flat seat wearing the cashmere sweater I had bought him for Christmas 2 years ago. He would be looking out the window at the clouds, smiling that shark smile of his, thinking he had just pulled off the heist of the century. I closed my eyes and I could almost hear their conversation. Gavin was likely bragging about his genius. He would be telling LaToya how easy it was. He would be saying that the old man was probably already dead from the heart attack induced by the sugar pills. He would be laughing about Tiana freezing in the shed, calling her collateral damage. They were probably clinking glasses to a new future, a future built on the ashes of my life. Gavin was obsessed with cryptocurrency and risky tech startups. He had lost thousands of dollars on them in the past, but he always claimed he just needed more capital to make it big. Now he thought he had that capital. He was probably pulling up the listing for my house on his tablet right now, drafting the sales pitch. Prime real estate, he would say. Perfect for flipping. He would tear down the home I built with my own hands, the home where Odessa and I raised our daughter, and he would sell the land to the highest bidder. He wouldn't care about the history. He wouldn't care about the memories. To him, my life was just an asset to be liquidated so he could play the big-shot investor he always pretended to be. LaToya would be nodding along, blinded by the promise of luxury. She would be dreaming of new purses, new cars, and a life where she didn't have to look at her father or her daughter ever again. They were high on oxygen and hubris, convinced that the world below was theirs for the taking. But gravity is a law that applies to everyone, even the wicked. While they were celebrating their victory in the sky, I was sitting in my study with a team of people who knew how to bring them crashing down. Mrs. Harrison had sent over her forensic accountant and a cybersecurity specialist named Marcus. Marcus was young, quiet, and typed faster than anyone I had ever seen. He had set up a command center on my oak desk, connecting his laptop to my main banking server. We were not just freezing accounts. We were dismantling their entire digital existence. Gavin had made a fatal mistake years ago when he set up the smart home system and the digital banking for the family. He was lazy. He had used my primary email address and my social security number as the root for the family plan, because my credit score was perfect and his was garbage. He thought he was controlling me by managing the apps, but in reality, he had built his house on my foundation. Mr. Freeman Marcus said, his eyes fixed on the screen. I have located the primary joint account. It is linked to your main savings, but the authorization requires your biometric confirmation to make changes. However, as the primary account holder, you have the right to revoke all secondary access tokens immediately. Do it, I said. My voice was calm, cold. Revoke everything. I want them to be ghosts. Marcus typed a series of commands. I watched as the screen flashed red, then green. Done, he said. The cards ending in 4098 and 5521 are reported stolen. The bank has flagged all transactions from the last 24 hours as fraudulent, including the hotel booking and the flight upgrades. They will not be kicked off the plane, obviously, but the moment they land, the credit card company is going to want answers. Good, I said. Now the house. Gavin loved gadgets. He had installed smart locks, smart thermostats, and smart cameras all over my property. He claimed it was for my safety, but I knew it was so he could monitor me. He wanted to know when I came and went. He wanted to control the environment. That was how he turned the heat off remotely. He thought he held the keys to the castle. Marcus pulled up the home automation dashboard. I see his admin profile, Marcus said. He has remote access to everything. Locks, lights, temperature. Delete him, I ordered. Change the master password. Activate the lockdown protocol. I want every code changed. I want his fingerprint wiped from the digital memory. Marcus hit enter. Access denied appeared under Gavin's profile name. He is locked out, Marcus confirmed. He cannot open the front door. He cannot turn on the lights. He cannot even check the cameras to see if you are home. To him, this house has just gone dark. I leaned back in my chair, watching the digital walls go up. It was a strange feeling. For years I had felt helpless watching them spend my money and disrespect my home. I had stayed silent to keep the peace, to keep access to Tiana. But the peace was gone. Now there was only the war, and I had just cut their supply lines. I looked at the clock. Their flight was scheduled to land in Honolulu in 20 minutes. The sun would be setting over the Pacific. They would be gathering their carry-on bags, putting on their sunglasses, preparing to step out into paradise. They had no idea that they were walking into a financial hurricane. I want you to monitor their activity, I told Marcus. I want to know exactly when they try to spend a dime. I want to see the rejection codes. We waited. The silence in the study was broken only by the hum of the computer fans and the distant crackle of the fire in the living room where Tiana slept. I pictured the plane descending. I pictured the wheels touching the tarmac. I pictured the chime of the seatbelt sign turning off. That was the moment everyone turns on their phones. On the screen in front of us, a cascade of notifications began to appear. It started with a ping from the bank's security server. Alert. Device login attempted. iPhone 14 Pro Max. Location Honolulu International Airport. Access denied. User suspended. Then another. Alert. Device login attempted. iPhone 13. Location Honolulu International Airport. Access denied. User suspended. They were trying to check their balances. They were probably trying to transfer more money to pay for the limo Gavin had undoubtedly ordered. Then came the transaction attempts. Transaction declined. Uber Black. Amount $150. Reason card reported lost or stolen. Transaction declined. Hertz Car Rental. Amount $2,000. Reason card frozen by issuer. I watched the screen, imagining the scene. Gavin standing on the curb in the humid Hawaiian air, his phone in his hand, his face turning red. He would be tapping the screen furiously, thinking it was a glitch. He would be cursing the signal. He would be trying a different card. Transaction declined. American Express Platinum. Reason primary account holder revoked authorization. He was trying everything. He was running through every piece of plastic in his wallet, and every single one of them was a dead end. He was stranded. He was 5,000 miles from home with a wife who demanded luxury, and he didn't even have the money to buy a bottle of water. LaToya would be panicking now. I knew my daughter. She lived her life on social media. She needed the world to know she was successful. She would be trying to post the arrival selfie, trying to check in at the Four Seasons, trying to show off. Marcus pointed to a separate window on his screen. Look at this, he said. It was a log of social media API requests. LaToya's Instagram and Facebook accounts were linked to her phone number, which was part of the family plan I paid for. I had told Marcus to suspend the data plan. Data service suspended, upload failed, connection timeout. She couldn't post, she couldn't brag, she couldn't even load her feed to see if anyone was liking her old photos. She was cut off from her source of validation. She was invisible. I imagined the panic setting in, the realization that something was wrong. Not just a little wrong, but catastrophically wrong. They were standing in paradise with empty pockets. They couldn't rent a car. They couldn't call a car service. They couldn't even check into the hotel because the card used for the deposit had just bounced. They were stuck on the sidewalk at the airport with their Louis Vuitton luggage and their arrogance, and they had nowhere to go. The phone on my desk rang. It wasn't my cell phone. It was the landline, the one I kept for emergencies. The caller ID showed a number from Hawaii. It was Gavin. He was using a payphone, or maybe he had borrowed a stranger's phone. He was calling the house. He thought I was dead or dying, but he needed to scream at someone. He probably expected to hear the answering machine, or maybe Tiana crying if she had managed to get out. I let it ring 3 times. Then I picked up the receiver. I didn't say anything. I just listened. "Hello," Gavin shouted. His voice was tinny and distorted by panic. "Hello, is anyone there? Pick up the damn phone." I breathed into the receiver, calm and steady. "Who is this?" Gavin demanded. "Listen, if this is the police or something, I want to talk to my lawyer. My cards aren't working. There is a glitch in the system." I leaned close to the microphone. "It is not a glitch, Gavin," I said. My voice was low, the rumble of a train coming down the track. "It is an eviction." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. Zeke Gavin stammered. You are alive." "I am alive," I said. "And Tiana is alive. And I have the box, Gavin. I have Odessa's box." I heard a sharp intake of breath. He knew. He knew exactly what that meant. "You listen to me, old man," he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You don't know what you are doing. You turn those cards back on right now. We are stranded. We have no money. You have feet," I said. "Start walking." "Zeke, wait." LaToya's voice came on the line, shrill and terrified. "Daddy, please. We are stuck. We can't even get a taxi. It is hot and I am tired. Please just transfer some money. We can talk about this when we get back." "There is nothing to talk about," I said. "You wanted to be free of your burdens, LaToya. Congratulations. You are free. You are free of my money. You are free of my house. You are free of your daughter. Enjoy the weather." "Daddy, no," she screamed. I hung up the phone. Then I unplugged the cord from the wall. I looked at Marcus and Mrs. Harrison, who had been listening on speaker. Mrs. Harrison had a smile on her face that was sharp enough to cut glass. "That was effective," she said. "But now they are going to get desperate. Desperate people do stupid things. I count on it," I said. "They are going to try to come back. They are going to try to fight." "Let them come," Mrs. Harrison said, opening her briefcase. "By the time they manage to scrape together enough change to fly Coach back to Georgia, I will have a judge's signature on a document that says they can't come within 500 feet of this property, and the debt Marcus asked." "Execute the clawback," I said. Marcus hit the final key. I had lent Gavin $50,000 5 years ago to start a business that never existed. I had made him sign a promissory note secured by his personal assets, mostly to shut him up. He thought I had lost the paper. I hadn't. It was in the safe deposit box at the bank, not the wall safe he broke into. The clawback meant that any liquid cash he had in his personal unconnected accounts, any crypto wallets he had linked to his identity, were now subject to immediate lien. I watched the numbers on the screen. His personal checking account, which had about $4,000 in it, drained to zero in seconds. His savings account drained. Even his crypto wallet, which he bragged about constantly, showed a transfer initiation. He was broke, not just cash poor. He was destitute. They were in Hawaii with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a suitcase full of swimsuits. I stood up and walked back to the living room. Tiana was stirring. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. She looked at me, and for the first time in days, she smiled. A small, weak smile, but it was real. "Grandpa," she said, "is the bad man gone?" I sat down next to her and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Yes, baby," I said. "The bad man is gone, and he is never coming back." But the war wasn't over. This was just the opening battle. Gavin was cornered, and a cornered rat bites. I knew he had friends, shady friends, people he owed money to. And now that I had cut off his money supply, those people were going to come looking for him. And when they realized he wasn't here, they might come looking for the next best thing, his family. I needed to secure the perimeter. I needed to make sure that when Gavin eventually found his way back to this house, he would find a fortress, not a victim. I looked at the window where the snow was starting to fall again. The cold was outside, but inside the fire was burning hot. I was awake. I was angry. And I was ready for whatever came next. 5,000 miles away, the sun was dipping below the horizon in Maui, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold that looked like a bruise healing on the skin of the sky. I could see it in my mind perfectly because I knew the exact itinerary Gavin had printed out and left on my desk to taunt me. They had arrived at the Four Seasons Resort ready to be treated like royalty. Gavin would have strutted into that open-air lobby with his chest puffed out, wearing his designer sunglasses indoors, while LaToya trailed behind him snapping photos for her social media feed that she did not yet know was disabled. They approached the front desk with the entitlement of people who have never worked a day of hard labor in their lives. I could imagine the receptionist greeting them with a flower lei and a glass of chilled juice. Gavin would have slapped down the heavy metal credit card, the one linked to my primary savings account, with a smug grin. He probably demanded an ocean view upgrade before the poor girl even had a chance to say hello. But then came the moment I had been waiting for. The moment the card was swiped. Back in my study in Georgia, I watched the notification pop up on my screen. Transaction attempted, Four Seasons Maui, status declined, reason reported fraud. I leaned back in my leather chair and pictured the scene. The receptionist's smile would have faltered. She would have typed something into her keyboard, frowned, and swiped the card again. Then she would have looked up at Gavin, not with reverence, but with suspicion. "I am sorry, sir," she would have said. "This card has been declined." Gavin would have laughed a loud barking sound. "That is impossible," he would say, loud enough for the other guests to hear. "That is an American Express Platinum linked to a 7-figure account. Run it again." She would have run it again. And again the red light would have flashed. By now a line would be forming behind them. Wealthy tourists in linen suits and expensive jewelry would be shifting impatiently. Gavin's face would be turning that shade of blotchy red he always got when he was embarrassed. "Try this one," he would say, pulling out the Visa. Declined. "Try the MasterCard." Declined. Then the manager would have stepped out from the back office. He would not be smiling. He would be holding a printout of the fraud alert I had filed 30 minutes ago. "Mr. Black," the manager would say, his voice low and firm, "we have just received a direct notification from the primary account holder, Mr. Ezekiel Freeman. He has flagged this reservation as unauthorized and the use of these cards as identity theft." LaToya would have gasped. My father did what she would screech. "That is ridiculous. My father is senile. He does not know what he is doing. The manager would not care. To him, they were just grifters trying to scam a 5-star resort." "I have been instructed to confiscate these cards, sir," the manager would continue, reaching out his hand. "And I must ask you to leave the property immediately. If you do not leave, security will escort you out and we will contact the local authorities." I imagined Gavin trying to grab the cards back, trying to make a scene, trying to use his physical size to intimidate them. But hotel security in places like that are not to be trifled with. 2 large men in tropical shirts would have stepped out from the shadows. They would have taken Gavin by the arms, not gently, and guided him toward the exit. They were thrown out. Not just asked to leave, but thrown out like trash. They stood on the curb, surrounded by their Louis Vuitton luggage, with the humid tropical air sticking to their skin and the humiliating stares of the other guests burning into their backs. They had no room. They had no rental car because that reservation had been canceled too. They were standing in paradise with absolutely nothing. My phone rang. It was a FaceTime request from LaToya. I declined it. I did not want to see her face. I wanted her to hear my voice and nothing else. She called again immediately, this time a regular voice call. I let it ring twice, then I picked up. "Daddy, what is wrong with you?" she screamed. Her voice was shrill, hysterical. "We are at the hotel and they just humiliated us. They cut up the cards, Daddy. They treated us like criminals. You need to call them right now and fix this. Tell them you made a mistake. Tell them we have permission." I sat in the dark of my study, illuminated only by the glow of the computer monitors. I listened to her scream and I felt nothing. No love, no pity, just a cold, hard resolve. "Hello, LaToya," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and freezing cold. "Daddy, did you hear me?" she yelled. "Fix this. We are stranded." "I hear you, LaToya," I said. "But I am a little busy right now." Busy doing what she demanded. You are sitting in that old house doing nothing like always. I am busy warming up your daughter, I said. The line went silent. The screaming stopped. I found her, Latoya. I continued. I found Tiana in the tool shed where your husband locked her. She was freezing to death. She had ice in her hair. She was curled up in a ball trying to stay alive because her mother decided a vacation was more important than her life. Daddy, she stammered. Gavin said, he said he took her to a neighbor. Do not lie to me, I roared. And for the first time my voice rose, shaking the dust in the room. I have the security footage, Latoya. I saw you standing on the porch drinking wine while he dragged that baby across the ice. I saw you check your makeup while he locked her in a box to die. But Daddy, she whimpered, her voice small and terrified now. It was Gavin. I was scared of him. You were not scared, I said. You were greedy. You left a note on my fridge telling me she was my problem. Well, guess what, Latoya? She is my problem now. And you are not. Daddy, please, she cried. We have no money. We have nowhere to go. You should have thought about that before you tried to kill my granddaughter and rob me blind, I said. Do not call this number again. Not until you have learned how to be a human being. And Latoya, if you try to come near this house, I will have you arrested for child abandonment so fast your head will spin. I hung up the phone. I stared at the device in my hand. It felt heavy, as if it contained all the disappointment of the last 30 years. I blocked her number, then I blocked Gavin's. Back in Hawaii, Gavin was watching Latoya lower her phone, her face pale and streaked with mascara. He knew then that the old man wasn't dead. He knew the plan had failed. But Gavin was a survivor, or so he thought. He always had a backup plan. He always had a secret stash. I watched on my computer screen as he accessed his private banking app. He was trying to move money. He was trying to save himself. He had a secret account at a digital bank, one he thought I didn't know about. He had been siphoning money into it for years, skimming off the top of the grocery budget, taking cash back at the hardware store, stealing $20 here and $50 there. He had built up a nest egg of about $8,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to get a hotel room and a flight home. He opened the app on his phone. I could imagine his fingers trembling as he typed in his passcode. He needed that money. It was his lifeline. But he had forgotten about the contract he signed 5 years ago. When he started his failed dropshipping business, he had come to me begging for a loan. I gave him $50,000, but I made him sign a promissory note. It had a specific clause, a general lien on all present and future assets in the event of default. He had signed it without reading it, thinking I was just a senile old fool who would lose the paper. I hadn't lost it, and Mrs. Harrison had just enforced it. Gavin stared at his screen. The balance didn't say $8,000. It said 0. Next to the balance was a transaction note. Seizure by creditor Ezekiel Freeman pursuant to promissory note dated August 12, 2018. He swiped to his crypto wallet. 0. He checked his PayPal. 0. He checked his Venmo. 0. He was standing on an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with a wife who hated him, a father-in-law who was hunting him, and pockets full of lint. He couldn't buy a bottle of water. He couldn't buy a sandwich. He couldn't even pay for a taxi to take them back to the airport. They were trapped. I watched the digital confirmation of the seizure appear on my screen. $8,432 recovered. It was a drop in the bucket compared to what they had stolen, but it wasn't about the amount. It was about the timing. I imagined Gavin looking at Latoya. I imagined the realization dawning on them both. The sun was gone now. The darkness of the tropical night was settling in. The tourists were heading to their dinners, laughing and drinking, and Gavin and Latoya were sitting on their suitcases on the concrete curb alone. They had wanted paradise. I gave them hell. I stood up and walked away from the computer. My work for the night was done. They were safe for now, safely miserable. I went back to the living room. Tiana was awake, sitting up and drinking a cup of hot cocoa that Dr. Sterling had made for her. She looked at me over the rim of the mug. "Grandpa," she said softly, "are they coming back?" I sat down next to her and kissed her forehead. "No, baby," I said. "They are not coming back for a long, long time." Dr. Sterling packed up his bag. He looked at me, his eyes grave. "I have documented everything Zeke," he said. "The frostbite on her toes is mild, but she needs care. The bruising on her arm is consistent with being grabbed forcefully. And the pills. I am sending them to the lab, but my initial test shows they are 90% sugar and 10% filler. If you had taken them, you would have been unprotected. Thank you, Sterling, I said, shaking his hand. He paused at the door. Zeke, he said, you know this isn't over, right? When they get desperate, they are going to get dangerous. Gavin isn't the type to just walk away. I know, I said. I am counting on it. I locked the door behind him. I engaged the deadbolt. Then I went to the gun cabinet in the hallway. I took out my old Winchester rifle, the one I used to hunt deer with back when my knees were good. I checked the action. It was smooth and oiled. I loaded it. I sat in the rocking chair facing the front door with the rifle across my lap. Tiana fell asleep on the sofa under the warm glow of the fire. Outside, the winter wind howled, rattling the windows. Let them come, I thought. Let them find a way back. Because the next time Gavin stepped onto my property, he wouldn't be facing a confused old man. He would be facing a father protecting his young. And I wouldn't miss. The morning sun had not yet burned the frost off the grass when I found the envelope. It was buried at the bottom of the kitchen trash can underneath coffee grounds and empty takeout containers that Gavin had been too lazy to take to the curb. It was not a bill from the power company, and it was not a flyer for pizza. It was a thick manila envelope with no return address and a single red stamp in the corner that read, Urgent Personal Delivery. I wiped the coffee stains off the paper and tore it open. Inside was a document that made my blood run colder than the air in the tool shed. It was a deed of trust. I put on my reading glasses and stared at the paper. It was a mortgage agreement on my home. My home. The house I had built brick by brick in 1982. The house I had paid off 20 years ago. According to this paper, the house was now collateral for a high-interest short-term loan of $100,000. The lender was not a bank. It was a company called Red Star Capital, LLC. I knew that name. Everyone in the neighborhood knew that name. They were predatory lenders, loan sharks who operated out of a strip mall in Atlanta and charged interest rates that were illegal in 49 states. At the bottom of the page was a signature, Ezekiel Freeman. It was a forgery, but it was a good one. Gavin had clearly spent hours practicing my handwriting in that notebook I found in the shed. He had mortgaged my sanctuary to fund his gambling addiction and his crypto schemes. He had bet the roof over my granddaughter's head on a roll of the dice, and he had lost. Attached to the deed was a final notice letter. It was blunt and terrifying. Payment of $50,000 is due by Friday, January 17th. Failure to pay will result in immediate foreclosure and seizure of property. It was Wednesday. Gavin had timed this perfectly. He planned to be in Hawaii when the deadline hit. He expected me to be dead from the fake pills or incapacitated by the cold in the shed. He thought that when the sharks came to take the house, there would be nobody here to stop them. He planned to let them take the house to settle his debt while he sold the 50 acres of land to start his new life. He had sold me out completely. He had turned my life's work into a poker chip. I felt a surge of rage so powerful my hands shook. He didn't just want me dead. He wanted to erase my existence. He wanted to strip the copper from the walls and the shingles from the roof. He viewed me as nothing more than a resource to be mined until dry. I looked at the date on the letter. I had 48 hours before they came to take the keys. But I knew how these people worked. They didn't wait for deadlines. They liked to send a message early. I walked to the front window and looked out at the street. A black SUV with tinted windows was turning the corner. It moved slowly, prowling like a predator. It stopped right in front of my mailbox. They were here early. I told Tiana to go into the back bedroom and lock the door. I told her to put on her noise-canceling headphones and watch cartoons on my tablet. I did not want her to hear what was about to happen. She looked at me with those big knowing eyes and obeyed without a word. She was a soldier now, too. The banging on the door started 10 seconds later. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a fist hammering against the wood loud enough to rattle the picture frames. I picked up my Winchester rifle from the chair. I checked the safety. I didn't intend to shoot anyone unless I had to, but I wanted them to know that this was not a house of victims. I walked to the door and opened the main heavy wooden door, leaving the steel security screen locked in place. 2 men stood on my porch. They were huge. They wore leather jackets that strained across their shoulders, and they smelled of cheap cologne and tobacco. The one in front had a scar running from his ear to his jaw. He looked at me through the mesh, his eyes flat and dead. "Open the door, old man," he said. His voice was like grinding stones. "We are looking for Gavin." "Gavin isn't here," I said. I kept the rifle barrel pointed at the floor but clearly visible. "And neither is your money." The man laughed a dry, humorless sound. "We know the money isn't here. That is why we are here to assess the property. Gavin owes us 100 grand. He put this house up as security. Today is inspection day. You have a forged document," I said. "I didn't sign anything. My house is not your collateral." The man stepped closer, pressing his face to the screen. "I don't care about your handwriting analysis, old man. I care about what is owed. If Gavin doesn't pay, we take the house. If you don't open this door, we take the door." He reached for the handle. He was testing me. He thought I was a scared senior citizen who would crumble at the first sign of aggression. He thought I would beg. He thought I would cry. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I brought up the video I had saved, the one from Latoya's Instagram story, before I cut her off. I turned the brightness all the way up and pressed the screen against the wire mesh. "Look at this," I said. The man frowned, but he looked. On the screen, Gavin was sitting in a first-class seat holding a glass of champagne. He was laughing, wearing a gold watch, and pointing out the window at the clouds. The caption read, "Hawaii, here we come, living the best life." "He isn't here," I said, my voice steady and cold. "He is in Hawaii. He took the money he borrowed from you, and he spent it on first-class tickets in a 5-star hotel. He is drinking champagne right now. He is laughing at you." The man stared at the video. I saw the change in his eyes. The professional detachment vanished, replaced by a personal insult. Sharks don't like being robbed, but they hate being mocked. Gavin wasn't just a debtor anymore. He was a disrespect. "He told us he needed the money for his father-in-law's surgery," the man growled. "He said you were dying. I look pretty alive to you, don't I?" I asked. "He lied to you. He stole from you. And now he is sitting on a beach, 5,000 miles away, spending your cash on lobster and liquor, while you stand on my porch in the cold." The man pulled back from the door. He looked at his partner. His partner looked furious. "I am not paying you," I said. "I didn't borrow the money, and this house belongs to me, not him. You can try to take it, but you will have to come through this rifle, and a dozen police officers to do it. And even if you win, you will spend years in court proving that signature is real." I paused, letting the reality sink in. Or I continued, "I can give you something better." The man with the scar looked at me. "What?" "I can give you him," I said. I pulled a piece of paper from my pocket. On it, I had written the address of the hotel in Maui where they had tried to stay. I had written Gavin's personal cell phone number. And I had written the flight number of their return trip, which I had found in his email before I locked him out. "He is stranded," I said. "I cut off his credit cards. He has no money. He is sleeping on a bench near the airport or in the hotel lobby if they haven't kicked him out yet. He is sitting duck." I slid the paper through the mail slot. The man picked it up. He read it. Then he looked at me with a newfound respect. "You are a cold bastard," the man said. "I am a father protecting his home," I replied. "Do what you have to do. Just do it away from my porch." The man took out his phone. He dialed the number on the paper. I stood there watching him. 5,000 miles away, the sun had set. Gavin was sitting on a hard wooden bench outside the Honolulu airport terminal. Latoya was asleep on her suitcase, exhausted from crying. Gavin's stomach was rumbling. He hadn't eaten in 12 hours. He was holding his phone, praying for a miracle, praying that I would call back and say it was all a joke. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. He answered it, desperate. "Hello. Is this the bank?" I heard the man on my porch speak into his phone. His voice was low, terrifyingly calm. "Gavin, this is Red Star. We saw your video. Nice champagne." I could imagine the color draining from Gavin's face. I could imagine his heart stopping. "We know where you are," the man said. "We have people in Honolulu. We have friends at the airport. You enjoyed the flight out, Gavin, because the flight back is going to be very uncomfortable." The man hung up. He didn't say goodbye to me. He just nodded, turned around and walked back to the black SUV. The engine roared to life. They drove away, not slowly this time, but with purpose. They had a target. And it wasn't me. I closed the heavy wooden door and locked the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for hours. I wasn't safe yet, but the immediate danger had passed. I had turned Gavin's wolves against him. I walked back to the bedroom. Tiana was sitting up, her headphones around her neck. "Who was at the door?" "Grandpa?" she asked. "Just some men looking for your dad," I said. "I told them where to find him." She nodded, accepting this. She didn't ask if they were friends. She knew Gavin didn't have friends. "Grandpa," she said, her voice small. "I am hungry." I smiled. It was the best thing I had heard all day. "Let me make you some pancakes," I said. "And then we have some work to do. We need to find a lawyer who is meaner than those men outside. Because while the sharks were hunting Gavin, I still had to secure the future. I had to make sure that when the dust settled, the land, the money, and the girl were safe forever. The war wasn't over. But the tide had just turned, and I was the one steering the ship." The sun rose over Honolulu, but for Gavin and LaToya it brought no warmth, only the harsh, revealing light of their new reality. They had spent the night on a concrete bench outside the departures terminal, huddled together, not out of love, but out of a desperate need to share body heat against the damp ocean breeze. They were thirsty. They were exhausted. But more than anything, they were starving. They had not eaten since the peanuts on the plane almost 24 hours ago. The smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee drifted from the airport food court, taunting them, but with $0 in their accounts and their credit cards destroyed, they might as well have been smelling food on the moon. LaToya looked at her husband. The man she had married for his potential, for his bravado, for his promises of a high society life, was now a disheveled mess. His designer linen shirt was stained with sweat and dirt. His expensive haircut was flattened on one side. He looked weak. He looked defeated. And for the first time, LaToya saw him not as her ticket out of my house, but as the anchor dragging her down. "You said you had handled it," she hissed, her voice raspy from dehydration. "You said my father was taken care of. You said the money was secure. You said we were going to be rich, Gavin." Gavin rubbed his face, his stubble making a scratching sound. "Shut up, LaToya." "I am thinking." "You are not thinking," she snapped, pushing him away. "You are failing. You have always failed. My father was right about you. You are just a talker with empty pockets. We are stranded here because you could not even kill an old man correctly." Gavin stood up so fast the bench rattled. He loomed over her, his face twisted in a snarl that showed his true teeth. The charm was gone. The facade of the loving husband was gone. "Do not talk to me about your father," he spat. "That old man is the devil. I should have finished him myself instead of trusting those pills. I should have suffocated him with a pillow years ago." He lowered his voice, but the venom in it was loud enough to poison the air. "I should have known better," he muttered, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "I should never have married into your family. I should have found a nice girl from a good background, not the daughter of a cheap, stingy black railroad worker who thinks he is better than everyone else just because he saved a few pennies." LaToya froze. She stared at him. Gavin had made jokes before. He had made comments about my frugal nature, about my taste in music, about my friends. But he had never said it out loud. He had never explicitly crossed that line. "What did you say?" she whispered. "You heard me," Gavin said, not backing down. "Your father is a miser. He sits on that land and that money like a dragon while we starve. He is nothing. And you know what, LaToya? You are just like him. You think the world owes you something, but you are just the daughter of a laborer. I lifted you up. I gave you class. And this is how you repay me, by letting your father humiliate me." LaToya stood up. Her hands were shaking. She had betrayed me. She had stolen from me. She had left her own daughter to freeze. But hearing her husband, the man she sacrificed everything for, speak about her heritage and her father with such raw, unfiltered hatred, broke something inside her. She realized in that moment that he didn't love her. He tolerated her. He viewed her as a conduit to my assets and nothing more. She didn't scream. She didn't hit him. She just looked at him with a cold, hollow stare. "You didn't lift me up," she said. "You buried me, and now we are both in the dirt." Gavin sneered and turned away. He didn't care about her feelings. He cared about survival. He cared about the threats he had received from the loan sharks. He knew he had to get off this island before the Red Star associates found him. He needed money. Fast. He looked down at his wrist. The gold Rolex Submariner glinted in the morning sun. It was his pride and joy. He told everyone it cost $15,000. He flashed it at parties. He checked the time constantly just to show it off. He had bought it 3 years ago with the money I gave him for a down payment on a house he never bought. "We need tickets," he said, touching the watch. This is the only way. He grabbed his suitcase and marched toward the exit, leaving Latoya trailing behind him. He found a pawn shop 3 blocks from the airport, a grimy place with bars on the windows and a sign that said, "We buy gold cash fast." Gavin walked in with the arrogance returning to his stride. He slammed the watch onto the glass counter. "I need cash," he told the broker, a large man with tattoos up his neck. "This is a Rolex Submariner. Authentic. Box and papers are at home, but you can see the quality. I need 10,000. I will take 8 if you are quick." The broker picked up the watch. He didn't look impressed. He put a jeweler's loop to his eye and examined the face. He turned it over. He unscrewed the back with a small tool. He looked at the movement inside. Then he laughed. It wasn't a polite laugh. It was a belly laugh. 8,000, the broker wheezed. "Buddy, you are funny." "What is so funny?" Gavin demanded. "That is a Swiss masterpiece." The broker tossed the watch back onto the counter. It slid across the glass and hit Gavin's hand. "That is a Canal Street special, my friend. It is a fake. A good fake, maybe a replica worth a couple $100 brand new, but it is a fake. The movement is Japanese quartz, not Swiss automatic. The gold is plating, not solid." Gavin turned pale. "That is impossible. I paid 15,000 for this." "Then you got scammed," the broker said. "Or someone switched it on you." Gavin stared at the watch. His mind raced. He had kept it in the safe in our guest room for months when he wasn't wearing it. The safe I had access to. I smiled as I imagined the realization hitting him. 2 years ago, I had found the watch sitting on the bathroom counter. I knew he had bought it with stolen money, so I took it. I replaced it with a high-quality replica I bought online for $200. I sold the real one and put the $15,000 into a trust fund for Tiana. He had been wearing a toy for 2 years, strutting around like a peacock, and now that toy was his only lifeline. "I will give you $50 for the gold plating," the broker said. "Take it or leave it." $50. It wasn't even enough for a meal. Gavin looked at Latoya. She was leaning against the wall, looking at him with pure disgust. She knew. She knew he had been duped, or that he was lying about the value all along. "Please," Gavin begged, his voice cracking. "I need to get home. I have a family emergency. Give me 500, please." The broker looked at him. He saw the desperation. He saw the expensive clothes covered in grime. He saw a man who had hit rock bottom. "I will give you 200, the broker said. "And that is charity." Gavin took the money. He sold his dignity, his pride, and his $15,000 symbol of success for $200. He walked out of that shop with his head down, looking at the 2 crisp $100 bills in his hand. It was enough for 2 one-way tickets on the cheapest cargo flight available, but it wasn't enough for food. They walked back to the airport in silence. The hunger was a sharp pain in their stomachs now, but the shame was heavier. When they reached the ticketing counter, Gavin slammed the cash down. 2 tickets to Atlanta, he demanded. "Now." The agent typed on her keyboard. She frowned. She looked at their passports, which they had thankfully kept in their pockets. She typed again. Then she picked up her phone and spoke quietly. "Sir, ma'am, please step to the side," the agent said. "Why?" Gavin shouted. "I have the money. Just give me the boarding passes." 2 uniformed police officers approached them from behind. One of them placed a hand on Gavin's shoulder. "Mr. Gavin Black, Mrs. Latoya Black," the officer said. "We need you to come with us." "Am I under arrest?" Gavin asked, his voice trembling. "Not yet," the officer said. "But we have a flag on your identities from the mainland authorities. There is an active investigation regarding the endangerment of a minor named Tiana Freeman." Latoya let out a sob. Gavin looked like he was going to vomit. "We didn't do anything," Gavin lied. "She is with her grandfather. That is what we need to verify," the officer said. "Until we clear this up, you are on the federal no-fly list for all major commercial carriers. You are considered a flight risk." "But we want to go home," Latoya cried. "We are trying to go back." The officer looked at them with zero sympathy. "You can go home," he said. "But you are not flying Delta and you are not flying United. We are authorized to release you only if you board a transport flight that is leaving in 3 hours. It is a mail and cargo carrier that takes a limited number of budget passengers. It stops in Los Angeles, Phoenix, and Dallas before reaching Atlanta. It will take 20 hours, and you will be escorted to the gate by security." It was the ultimate humiliation. They were being treated like prisoners being transferred. They wouldn't be sitting in first class. They would be sitting in the jump seats at the back of a plane filled with packages and crates. "Fine," Gavin whispered. "Just get us on the plane." The officers escorted them through the terminal. People stared. Parents pulled their children closer. Gavin and Latoya walked with their heads down, stripped of their arrogance, stripped of their luxury, and stripped of their freedom. They were being shipped back to me like defective merchandise. As they sat in the holding area waiting for the cargo plane, Gavin looked at Latoya. "This is your father's fault," he whispered. "He did this." Latoya looked back at him. Her eyes were hard. "No," she said. "He just rang the bell. You are the one who opened the door." They sat in silence, stomachs growling, watching the first-class passengers board the jets they were banned from. They knew they were going back to a storm. They just didn't know that the hurricane waiting for them in Georgia was going to be worse than anything they could imagine. I was waiting. And I had not even started the real punishment yet. The journey back from paradise was a 20-hour descent into hell that stripped away the last layers of my son-in-law's dignity. They did not fly back on a luxury jet with reclining seats and hot towels. They flew on a cargo transport that had been retrofitted with narrow, stiff seats in the rear of the fuselage. It was a mail plane that stopped in Los Angeles, Phoenix, and Dallas before finally limping toward Atlanta. Gavin and Latoya were seated in the last row right next to the lavatory door, which banged open and shut with every bout of turbulence, releasing the stale chemical stench of blue disinfectant and human waste. There was no food service. There were no movies. There was only the roar of the engines and the cramped misery of their own bodies. Gavin was a large man used to spreading out and taking up space, but here he was folded into a seat designed for a child, his knees pressed against the hard plastic of the row in front of him. His expensive linen suit was wrinkled and stained with sweat. He smelled of fear and the airport floor he had slept on. Beside him, Latoya stared out the small, scratching window, her face a mask of smeared makeup and exhaustion. She didn't speak to him. Every time the plane jolted, she looked at him with a hatred that was colder than the air in the cargo hold. They landed in Atlanta at 2 a.m. They were dehydrated, hungry, and stiff. They walked through the terminal like ghosts, dragging their carry-on bags, which were now the only possessions they had left in the world. They didn't have money for a town car. They barely had enough cash left from the pawned watch to pay for a budget rideshare. They sat in the back of a beat-up sedan that smelled of old cigarettes, watching the familiar streets of our neighborhood pass by. They thought the nightmare was ending. They thought they would walk into my house, take a hot shower, and sleep in their soft bed. They thought they could talk their way out of this in the morning. They were wrong. The nightmare was just beginning. When the taxi dropped them off at the curb, the house was dark. It loomed against the night sky, silent and imposing. Gavin paid the driver with his last crumbling bills and dragged his suitcase up the driveway. He walked with a limp, his bravado gone, replaced by a desperate need for rest. He climbed the porch steps and reached for his keys. His hand was shaking as he slid the key into the lock. He tried to turn it. It didn't move. He frowned and jiggled it, thinking it was just stuck. He tried again, applying more force. The key refused to turn. I had called the locksmith 10 minutes after they left for the airport 3 days ago. Every lock on the house, every deadbolt, every window latch had been changed. The key Gavin held was nothing more than a piece of scrap metal. Gavin stepped back and looked at the door. He kicked it once, a weak, frustrated thud. "Open the damn door," he whispered, his voice cracking. Latoya pushed past him and tried the handle. Locked. She rang the doorbell. Silence. She rang it again and again, pressing the button until her finger turned white. Then she turned around and looked at the front lawn. In the darkness, she saw a large, shapeless mound piled near the curb, right where the garbage truck usually stopped. At first, she thought it was trash bags. She walked closer, her heels clicking on the pavement. Then she screamed. It wasn't trash. It was their lives. I had spent the afternoon clearing out the guest room. I had taken every designer dress, every Italian suit, every shoe, and every handbag they owned, and I had piled them on the grass. There were thousands of dollars worth of clothing lying in a heap exposed to the elements. Latoya ran toward the pile, grabbing a silk blouse that was twisted around a pair of muddy boots. "My clothes," she shrieked. He threw out my clothes. And then, as if on cue, the timer I had set on the irrigation system clicked. The sprinkler heads popped up from the grass with a mechanical hiss. A second later, jets of freezing water sprayed across the lawn. The water hit the pile of clothes, soaking the silk, ruining the leather, and turning their expensive wardrobe into a sodden, heavy mess. Latoya tried to gather the clothes, shielding them with her body, but the water was relentless. She slipped on the wet grass, falling onto the pile of her own ruined vanity. She sat there in the mud and water, screaming at the dark house, screaming at me, screaming at the world. Gavin stood on the porch watching the water destroy the last symbols of his status. He didn't move. He just stared at the door that wouldn't open. Inside the house, I stood in the hallway watching them on the security monitor. Tiana was asleep in my room, safe and warm, with noise-canceling headphones over her ears. I checked the time. The sheriff was right on schedule. LaToya ran up to the porch, pounding on the door with her wet fists. "Daddy, open this door," she screamed. "I know you are in there. Open it. It is freezing. We are wet. Let us in." I picked up the remote for the porch light and flicked it on. The sudden brightness blinded them. I unlocked the heavy wooden inner door and opened it, but I kept the steel security gate locked tight. I stood there in my robe, looking down at them through the iron bars. I looked warm. I looked dry. I looked like the owner of the house. "Dad, thank God," Gavin said, stepping forward, his face lighting up with pathetic hope. "Dad, listen, we can explain. The key didn't work. Let us in. We are exhausted." I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. "Daddy, please." LaToya sobbed, shivering in her wet clothes. "I am your daughter. You cannot leave me out here." Behind me, the kitchen door opened. Sheriff Miller stepped into the hallway. He was a large man with a gray mustache and eyes that had seen too many bad people to have any patience left. He walked up beside me and stood looking through the grate. "Gavin Black and LaToya Black," he said, his voice booming in the night air. "Step away from the door." Gavin froze. "Sheriff Miller, what are you doing here?" "My father-in-law is confused. He locked us out." "He is not confused," the sheriff said. "He is the homeowner, and you are trespassing." "Trespassing?" Gavin sputtered. "We live here." "Not anymore," I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was calm, carrying over the sound of the sprinklers. The sheriff pulled a packet of folded papers from his jacket. He slid them through the bars of the security gate. They fell onto the porch at Gavin's wet feet. "You have been served," the sheriff said. "That is an emergency restraining order. You are to stay 500 feet away from this property and 500 feet away from Ezekiel Freeman at all times. If you are still on this lawn in 2 minutes, you will be arrested for violation of a court order." LaToya looked at the papers, then up at me. Her eyes were wide with shock. "But what about Tiana?" "We came back for Tiana. Where is my daughter?" The sheriff looked at her with pure disgust. "You mean the child you left in a tool shed in sub-freezing temperatures?" he asked. "It was an accident," LaToya lied. "We didn't mean to." The sheriff cut her off. "That packet also contains an emergency custody order signed by a judge 2 hours ago. The state has revoked your parental rights pending a full investigation into child endangerment and abandonment. Tiana has been placed in the temporary kinship care of her grandfather. You have no rights to see her. You have no rights to speak to her. She is a ward of the court under Mr. Freeman's protection." No, LaToya screamed, throwing herself against the iron bars. "You cannot take my baby. She is mine." I took a step closer to the gate, looking my daughter in the eye. "She was yours when you left her to freeze," I said. "She was yours when you got on that plane. You made a choice, LaToya. You chose the vacation. You chose the money. You chose him. Now you have to live with it." "I hate you," she hissed, grabbing the bars. "I hate you, old man." "I know," I said, "but Tiana loves me, and that is all that matters." Sheriff Miller placed his hand on his holster. "You have 60 seconds to vacate the premises," he said. "Or you leave in the back of my car." Gavin grabbed LaToya's arm. "We have to go," he said, his voice defeated. "He means it." He dragged her down the steps, away from the warmth, away from the house, away from their daughter. They walked past the pile of sodden clothes, grabbing 2 wet suitcases and retreating into the darkness of the street. They were homeless. They were broke. And they were alone. I watched them go until they disappeared around the corner. Then I closed the heavy wooden door and locked it. I turned to the sheriff. "Thank you, Miller," I said. He nodded. "Get some rest, Zeke. I will have a patrol car sit at the end of the block tonight, just in case." I walked back to my room where Tiana was sleeping. She looked peaceful. I sat in the chair beside her bed and watched her chest rise and fall. I had won the battle for the house. I had won the battle for her safety. But the war wasn't over. Gavin still had secrets, and I still had the rest of Odessa's box to go through. Tomorrow, I would show them the true cost of their greed. Tomorrow, I would reveal the land they tried to steal and the fortune they threw away. But for tonight, the only sound in the house was the quiet breathing of a child who was finally safe. The sun had barely risen over the Georgia pines when the pounding started on my front door. It was not the rhythmic knock of a visitor, but the frantic, entitled hammering of a man who believed the world owed him an explanation. I sat at my dining room table nursing a cup of black coffee. Across from me sat Mrs. Harrison. She was dressed in a suit that cost more than Gavin's car, and she was reviewing a stack of documents with the precision of a surgeon sharpening a scalpel. She looked up at the sound of the banging and offered me a thin, terrifying smile. "Let them in," she said. I opened the door to find Gavin and LaToya standing on my porch. They looked like refugees from a failed social experiment. Their clothes were wrinkled and stained from their night on the street, and they smelled of desperation and stale sweat. But standing between them was a man I did not recognize. He was short, wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too big, and carrying a briefcase that looked like it was made of cardboard. "This is my attorney, Mr. Henderson," Gavin announced, puffing out his chest in a pathetic attempt to look intimidating. "We are here to take my daughter back, and we are here to serve you with a lawsuit for kidnapping and unlawful detention of a minor." Mr. Henderson wiped sweat from his forehead and handed me a crumpled piece of paper. "Mr. Freeman," he squeaked, his voice cracking, "you are in violation of parental rights statutes. If you do not release the child immediately, we will call the police and have you arrested for abduction." I looked at the paper. It was a cease and desist letter drafted on a template anyone could download from the internet. I looked at Gavin. He was smirking. He genuinely thought this was his checkmate moment. He thought that because I was an old man, I would crumble at the sight of a suit and a legal term. He thought I didn't have evidence. He thought his secrets were still safe in the dark. "Come inside," I said, stepping back. Gavin's smirk widened. He walked past me into the house, strutting like he owned the place again. LaToya followed, keeping her head down. Mr. Henderson trailed behind, looking around nervously as if he sensed a trap. I led them into the dining room. When Gavin saw Mrs. Harrison sitting at the head of the table, his step faltered. He knew who she was. Everyone in town knew who she was. She was the lawyer you hired when you wanted to destroy someone, not just sue them. "Sit down," I said. Gavin hesitated but sat. Mr. Henderson sat next to him, placing his briefcase on the table with a hollow thud. Mrs. Harrison did not introduce herself. She did not offer them coffee. She simply clasped her hands together and looked at the cheap lawyer. "Mr. Henderson," she said, "before you embarrass yourself further, I suggest you listen to what we have to say. Because if you proceed with this kidnapping accusation, I will personally file a complaint with the Bar Association for filing frivolous motions without due diligence." Mr. Henderson blinked rapidly. "Now see here," he stammered. "My client has rights. Your client has nothing." Mrs. Harrison cut him off. Gavin slammed his hand on the table. "Stop this. I want my daughter. You stole her. You locked us out of our house and you stole my child. That is kidnapping." I leaned forward. "You think I stole her, Gavin. You think I just took her because I was lonely." "I know you did," Gavin spat. "You always hated that we were happy. You wanted to turn her against us. But you have no proof of anything. You are just a crazy old man making things up." I looked at LaToya. She was staring at her hands, refusing to meet my eyes. "Is that true, LaToya?" I asked. "Did I make it up?" She didn't answer. Gavin laughed. "She isn't going to help you, old man. We are a team. Now give me Tiana or we call the cops." Mrs. Harrison reached into her bag and pulled out a small digital tablet. She placed it in the center of the table, facing Mr. Henderson and Gavin. "We don't need to call the police, Gavin," she said. "We already have. But before they get here to execute the warrants, I think you should hear something." She tapped the screen. The audio was crystal clear. It had been recorded by the high-fidelity microphone on the security camera inside the tool shed. The sound of the wind whipping against the tin roof filled the room, followed by the screech of the rusty door being kicked open. Then Gavin's voice filled the dining room, loud and angry. "Move, you little brat! You are blocking my blessing!" Then the sound of a child crying. Tiana's voice. "Please, Daddy, it is cold. Let me get my coat." Mr. Henderson stiffened in his chair. He looked at the tablet, then at Gavin. Then came the sound of a struggle, the sound of a small body hitting the floor. And then the voice that made LaToya flinch as if she had been slapped. It was her own voice recorded from the porch. "Just throw her in there, Gavin. If she freezes, she freezes. At least we save money on food." The recording ended. The silence in the dining room was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. LaToya's face had drained of all color, leaving her looking like a wax statue. She was trembling so violently that her chair vibrated against the floor. Gavin sat with his mouth open, staring at the tablet as if it were a bomb that had just detonated. Mr. Henderson stood up slowly. He closed his briefcase. His hands were shaking. "You told me this was a custody dispute," he whispered to Gavin. "You told me the grandfather took the child while you were at the store." Gavin stammered. "That is a fake. He edited that. It is AI. Mr. Henderson looked at Mrs. Harrison. "Is that verified?" "Authenticated by a forensic audio specialist this morning," Mrs. Harrison said calmly, "and we have the video to match." Mr. Henderson looked at Gavin with pure disgust. "I am withdrawing as counsel effective immediately. Do not call me. Do not come to my office. If you contact me again, I will call the police myself." He turned and walked out of the house, leaving the front door wide open, letting the cold winter air rush in. Gavin was alone now. His shield was gone. His lie was exposed. But he wasn't done. He was cornered, and his eyes darted around the room, looking for a way out, looking for a new lie to spin. "It doesn't matter," he hissed. "You can't prove intent. It was an accident. We didn't mean for it to get that cold. We were coming back. You can't take my child over a mistake." A mistake I repeated. I stood up. I walked to the sideboard and picked up a thick manila folder. I threw it onto the table. It landed with a heavy slap sliding across the polished wood until it hit Gavin's chest. "Open it," I said. Gavin looked at it. He didn't move. "Open it!" I roared, my voice shaking the walls. He opened the folder. The first thing he saw were the photos Dr. Sterling had taken. Close-ups of Tiana's fingers, blue and swollen from frostbite. Photos of the deep purple bruises on her upper arm shaped exactly like a man's fingers. Photos of her back where she had hit the lawnmower when he threw her. Latoya looked at the photos over his shoulder. She put a hand over her mouth and made a choking sound. "This isn't a mistake," I said. "This is torture. But that isn't the only thing in that folder, Gavin. Keep looking." He turned the page. He froze. It was the toxicology report from the lab. Dr. Sterling had rushed it through as an emergency. It showed the chemical breakdown of the white pills I had given him. Sucrose. Cellulose. Chalk. 0 active ingredients. Gavin looked up at me. His eyes were wide, terrified. "You swapped my heart medication," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than a shout. "You took the digoxin out of the bottle and you replaced it with sugar pills. You knew I had a refill coming up. You knew I would be stressed. You knew that without that medicine, my heart would stop within 3 days." "I didn't," he started, but his voice failed him. "You tried to kill me," I said. "You didn't just want to go to Hawaii. You wanted to come back to a funeral. You wanted to find me dead on the floor and Tiana frozen in the shed so there would be no witnesses to your theft." Latoya looked at Gavin. "You did what she whispered. You told me you just hid his pills. You didn't tell me you switched them." Gavin ignored her. He was looking at me, realizing the trap had snapped shut. "This isn't just about custody anymore, Gavin," I said, leaning over the table, my face inches from his. "This isn't civil court. This isn't a family dispute." I pointed a finger at his chest right over his heart. "This is attempted murder," I said. "This is child abuse in the 1st degree. This is fraud. This is conspiracy. I am not going to sue you for custody, Gavin. I am going to send you to prison. I am going to make sure you die in a concrete box just like you tried to make my granddaughter die in that shed." Gavin stood up, knocking his chair over. "You can't prove I did it," he shouted, his face turning red. "It is your word against mine." I pointed to the corner of the room where a small red light was blinking on a bookshelf. "We are recording Gavin," I said. "Just like I recorded you in the shed. Just like I recorded you on the phone. And just like the pharmacy cameras recorded you buying a pill press 2 weeks ago." Mrs. Harrison's investigator found the receipt. Gavin looked at the camera. He looked at the folder. He looked at his wife, who was backing away from him as if he were a monster. He realized then that it was over. The arrogance drained out of him, leaving only a hollow, terrified man. "Run," I said softly. He looked at me confused. "The police are 5 minutes away," I said, checking my watch. "Mrs. Harrison called them when you walked in the door. If you run now, you might make it to the end of the block before they catch you. It will make their job more fun." Gavin didn't run. He collapsed into the chair, putting his head in his hands. Latoya started to sob, a high-pitched wail of self-pity. I looked at them and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no joy, just the cold, clean feeling of taking out the trash. I turned to Mrs. Harrison. "Is the paperwork ready?" I asked. She nodded, handing me a pen. "Sign here," she said. This grants you emergency guardianship and authorizes the prosecution to proceed with maximum charges. I signed my name. Ezekiel Freeman. The hand that held the pen was steady. It was the hand of a man who had built railroads. A man who knew how to drive a spike. And I had just driven the final spike into the coffin of my son-in-law's life. The sirens were getting louder, wailing in the distance like a choir of banshees coming to drag my son-in-law to hell. But Gavin did not hear them. He was too busy laughing. It was a wet, broken sound that bubbled up from his chest and spilled out of his mouth like oil. He looked at me with eyes that were bloodshot and wild. He looked at Mrs. Harrison, who was calmly organizing her files. Then he looked around the dining room at the modest furniture, the old wallpaper, and the worn rug. He saw poverty where I saw history. He saw weakness where I saw restraint. And in his twisted mind, he found one last desperate hand to play. "You are bluffing, old man," Gavin choked out, wiping spit from his chin. "You are talking big about prison and attempted murder charges, but you are forgetting one thing. Lawyers cost money. Real lawyers, the kind that prosecute federal cases, cost a fortune. And you do not have a fortune. You have a pension and a house that I already mortgaged to the hilt." He stood up, swaying slightly on his feet, grabbing the edge of the table for support. His arrogance was a shield he was trying to weld back together with pure delusion. "You are broke, Zeke," he sneered. "You are a retired laborer living on Social Security. This house is all you have, and thanks to me, the Sharks own it now. You cannot afford to fight me. You cannot afford her." He pointed a shaking finger at Mrs. Harrison. "Once the state realizes you have no assets, they will put Tiana in foster care. They will see a senile old man with no resources and a house in foreclosure. You think you won the lottery because you stopped a credit card transaction. You won nothing. You are going to die poor and alone just like you lived." I watched him rant. I watched the spit fly from his lips. I watched LaToya look up at him with a glimmer of hope in her eyes, praying that maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe. They really believed it. They believed that because I drove a 15-year-old truck and wore work boots, that I was destitute. They believed that wealth only existed if you wore it on your wrist or drove it down the highway. They were so blinded by the flash of gold that they never bothered to check the weight of the stone. I did not get angry. I did not shout. I simply reached into the metal box that sat next to me, the box Tiana had saved from the shed. I pulled out a document that was bound in a blue legal folder. It was thick, heavy, and printed on high-quality bond paper. I laid it on the table. The sound of the paper hitting the wood was softer than Gavin's shouting, but it carried infinitely more weight. "You are right about one thing, Gavin," I said, my voice steady. "I do not spend money on things I do not need, but you are wrong about what I have." I slid the blue folder across the table. It stopped right in front of him next to the toxicology report that proved his guilt. "Read it," I said. Gavin looked at the folder. He looked at me. He hesitated. Then with a sneer of contempt, he flipped open the cover. His eyes scanned the first page. I saw his eyebrows knit together in confusion. He flipped to the second page, then the third. His reading speed increased. His breathing stopped. The color that had returned to his face during his rant drained away instantly, leaving him looking like a corpse standing upright. "What is this?" he whispered. "It is the reason you are going to jail for the rest of your life," I said. "Read the header," Mrs. Harrison said. "Read it out loud so your wife can hear." Gavin swallowed hard. His hands were trembling so badly the paper rattled like dry leaves in a storm. "Commercial ground lease agreement," he read, his voice barely audible. "Between Ezekiel Freeman and Apex Data Systems Global." Apex Data, LaToya gasped. She knew the name. Everyone knew the name. It was one of the biggest tech companies in the world. "They built the internet infrastructure." "Keep reading," I said. "Read the terms." Gavin's eyes darted down the page to the section highlighted in yellow. "Term 99 years, he read. "Subject property 50 acres of undeveloped land in Clayton County." "That is the dirt patch," LaToya said, her voice rising in confusion. "That is the dead land you bought in the 80s. It is worthless, Daddy. It is just rocks and clay." "It is solid bedrock," I corrected her. "It is seismic stable, and it sits directly on top of the main fiber optic trunk line for the southeast. It is the only plot of land in 3 counties that can support the weight and the cooling needs of a hyperscale data center." Gavin dropped the folder. He stared at me with pure horror. He knew. He had tried to sell it for pennies because he thought it was just land. He didn't know about the infrastructure underneath. He didn't know the geology. He was a grifter, not a businessman. "Read the payment structure," Mrs. Harrison commanded. Gavin picked the folder back up. He looked at the bottom line. "Initial signing bonus, $15 million, he read. "Annual lease payment, $500,000 with a 3% inflationary adjustment every year, $15 million. The words hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. LaToya made a sound like a wounded animal. She grabbed the folder from Gavin's hands, tearing the paper in her haste. She stared at the numbers. She counted the zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, $15 million, she screamed. "You have $15 million. I signed the deal 3 days ago," I said. "The morning before I left for the cabin. The wire transfer hits my account tomorrow. That is why I was at the cabin, LaToya. I wasn't checking fences. I was meeting with the surveyors and the executives." Gavin collapsed into his chair. He looked at his hands. He looked at the room. He realized that while he was stealing loose change from my wallet and forging a $50,000 loan against my house, I was sitting on an empire. He had tried to kill me for a house worth $300,000 when the land he called garbage was worth 50 times that amount. "You knew," he whispered. "You knew all along. I knew the value of what I owned," I said. "You saw dirt. I saw a foundation. That is the difference between us, Gavin. You look at the surface. I look at the core." LaToya was hyperventilating. She was clutching the contract to her chest as if she could absorb the money through osmosis. "Daddy," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "This changes everything. We are rich. We can pay the debts. We can hire lawyers. We can fix this. We are family, Daddy. You can't send us to jail when we have this kind of money. We can start over." I stood up. I walked over to my daughter. I looked down at her, at the woman who had watched her husband drag her child through the snow. I reached out and took the blue folder from her hands. She held onto it for a second, her knuckles white, before I ripped it away. "We are not rich, LaToya," I said. "I am rich." I walked back to the metal box. I reached inside and pulled out one last thing. It was a white envelope sealed with red wax. It had LaToya's name written on the front in elegant cursive handwriting. "Do you recognize this?" I asked. LaToya stared at the envelope. Her lower lip trembled. "That is Mama's handwriting," she whispered. "Odessa wrote this 5 years ago," I said. 2 days before she died. She gave it to me, and she made me promise. She knew about the land, LaToya. She knew the value was going to skyrocket. She followed the zoning meetings. She was smarter than all of us combined. I held the envelope up to the light. "She told me to give this to you," I said, "but she gave me a condition. She said, 'Zeke, you give this to our daughter only when she learns how to love something more than she loves herself. You give this to her when she proves she is a mother first and a consumer second.'" I looked at the envelope, then at LaToya. "I was going to give it to you when you came back from Hawaii. I lied. I wanted to believe you needed a break. I wanted to believe you were good. But then I found Tiana in the shed. I ripped the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a deed transfer form. 'Your mother wanted you to have the land, LaToya,' I said, my voice breaking with the memory of my wife. 'She wanted you to have the security she never had growing up. She wanted you to build a legacy for Tiana.'" LaToya let out a wail that sounded like a physical blow. "But you failed the test," I said coldly. "You chose a vacation over your daughter's life. You chose a thief over your father. You didn't learn how to love, LaToya. You only learned how to want." I took the deed transfer form, the paper that would have put $15 million in her name, and I tore it in half. Then I tore it again, and again. I let the pieces flutter down onto the table like snow covering the wreckage of their lives. "It is gone," I said. "It is all gone." "No," LaToya screamed, dropping to her knees and scrambling for the pieces of paper. "No, Daddy, please. I can change. I can be better. Do not do this to me. It is not yours anymore," I said. I pointed to the bedroom door where Tiana was hiding. "It belongs to her," I said. "Every acre, every dollar, every cent of that contract is going into an irrevocable trust for Tiana Freeman. Mrs. Harrison drew up the papers this morning. I am the trustee until I die, and then a board of directors takes over until she is 25. You will never touch a dime of it, not for bail, not for a lawyer, not for a stick of gum." Gavin stared at the torn paper on the floor. He looked at me with a hatred so pure it was almost admiring. "You played us," he hissed. "You watched us dig our own graves, and you handed us the shovels." "I didn't hand you anything," I said. "You brought your own shovels." I just turned on the light so you could see where you were digging. The sirens outside were loud now. They were right in front of the house. Blue and red lights flashed through the front window, painting the dining room in the colors of judgment. Car doors slammed. Heavy boots stomped up the porch steps. Latoya was still on the floor trying to piece together the torn deed, weeping over the lost fortune. She didn't even hear the police. She was mourning the money more than she would ever mourn the loss of her freedom. I looked at them. My daughter on her knees, broken by greed. My son-in-law in his chair, broken by arrogance. They had traded a $15 million future for a $15,000 credit card fraud and a week in Hawaii they didn't even get to enjoy. They had everything I thought. They had a home. They had parents who loved them. They had a beautiful child, and they threw it all away because they didn't want to wait. They didn't want to work. They just wanted to take. I walked to the front door. I unlocked it. Sheriff Miller stood there with 2 deputies and 2 federal agents in suits. "They are in the dining room, Sheriff," I said. "They are all yours." As the officers swarmed into the house, handcuffs clinking, I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold, but it felt clean. I took a deep breath. The weight of the secret I had carried for 3 days was gone. The weight of the fear was gone. I heard the rights being read inside. I heard Latoya screaming my name. I heard the click of the cuffs. I didn't turn around. I looked out at the street, at the quiet morning, at the world that was still turning. I had lost my daughter, but I had saved my bloodline, and that was a trade I would make every single day. The handcuffs clicked shut around Gavin's wrists with a sound that was sweeter than any music I had ever heard. He stood in the center of the dining room, his head bowed, his arrogance stripped away, leaving only a sweating, trembling man who realized his life was over. Latoya sat on the floor, her expensive dress ruined, weeping not for her daughter but for the $15 million she had just lost. The federal agents were cataloging the evidence, bagging the computers and the phones. It seemed like the end. It seemed like justice had been served. But I was not done. Prison was one thing. I wanted them to feel the poverty they had tried to force upon me. I wanted them to know what it felt like to have absolutely nothing. Mrs. Harrison stepped forward. She motioned for the officers to pause for a moment. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a clipboard. She walked up to Gavin and held it in front of his face. "Mr. Black," she said, her voice sharp and clear. "Before you are transported to federal custody, we have a civil matter to settle." Gavin looked up, his eyes dull. "What does it matter?" he mumbled. "I am going to jail." "It matters," Mrs. Harrison said, "because prison is free, but your debts are not." She flipped the page on the clipboard. "For the last 3 years, you have borrowed significant sums of money from various high-risk lenders," she continued. "You owe $50,000 to Red Star Capital. You owe $40,000 to a private equity firm in Miami. You owe $30,000 to a loan shark in Atlanta. You borrowed against your car. You borrowed against your future earnings. You even borrowed against life insurance policies that do not exist." Gavin shrugged. "So what? I can't pay them. Let them sue me. I am bankrupt." "You are not bankrupt yet," Mrs. Harrison corrected him. "And those lenders are no longer your problem." Gavin frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that this morning Mr. Freeman purchased your debt," she said, pointing at me. "Every single promissory note, every lien, every marker you signed. My client bought them all for pennies on the dollar because those lenders knew you were a flight risk. Mr. Freeman is now your sole creditor, Gavin. You owe him $120,000 plus interest and penalties. And unlike those other lenders, Mr. Freeman has a court order for immediate asset seizure." Gavin looked at me, his jaw dropped. "You bought my debt," he whispered. "Why?" "So I could do this," I said. I nodded to the window. Outside, a large flatbed tow truck was backing into the driveway. The driver hopped out and began hooking chains to the undercarriage of Gavin's Porsche Cayenne. It was his pride and joy, the car he washed every Sunday while the roof of my house leaked. "Hey," Gavin shouted, struggling against the officer holding him. "That is my car. You can't take my car." "It is my car now," Mrs. Harrison said calmly. "We are seizing it to satisfy a portion of the debt. We are also seizing the contents of your storage unit in town, which we accessed an hour ago. Your golf clubs, your designer sneaker collection, your electronics. It is all being auctioned off tomorrow." Gavin's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He loved those things more than he loved his wife. He defined himself by his possessions. "You are stripping me," he screamed. You are leaving me with nothing. I walked up to him. I looked him in the eye. I am leaving you with exactly what you came here with, I said, which is nothing. You walked into my house with a suitcase of lies, and you are leaving in a government vehicle. That seems fair to me. The officer began to lead him toward the door. Wait, Mrs. Harrison said. One more thing. The watch. Gavin looked down at his wrist. He was wearing a different watch today, not the fake Rolex, but a Breitling he had bought last month. Take it off, Mrs. Harrison said. I can't, Gavin said, holding up his cuffed hands. The officer helped him. He unclasped the watch and handed it to Mrs. Harrison. She dropped it into a plastic evidence bag. Thank you, she said. That covers the interest for this month. LaToya looked up from the floor. She was staring at me with a mixture of hatred and confusion. Daddy, she whispered. Why are you doing this? He's going to prison. Isn't that enough? Why do you have to take everything? Because he took everything from me, I said. He took my trust. He took my peace. And he tried to take my life. But LaToya, I am not doing this just to punish him. I am doing it to show you who he really is. I walked back to the table and picked up the last folder from Odessa's metal box. It wasn't a deed. It wasn't a will. It was a thick brown envelope that my private investigator had handed me just 2 hours before the raid. I had saved it for the end. I had saved it for the moment when LaToya thought she had hit rock bottom so I could show her that there was a basement. Stand up, LaToya, I said. She stood up shaky and weak. You think you did this for us? I said, holding the envelope. You think you committed crimes and abandoned your child because you wanted a better life for your family. You think Gavin loves you. You think he was stressed about money because he wanted to give you the world. He does love me, LaToya sobbed. We made mistakes, but we did it together. I opened the envelope. I pulled out a stack of photographs and birth certificates. I fanned them out on the table next to the toxicology report and the $15 million contract. Look, I said. LaToya looked. The first photo showed Gavin sitting on a beach in Florida. He wasn't alone. He was holding a toddler, a little boy with curly hair and Gavin's nose. The woman sitting next to him was young blonde and laughing. The second photo showed Gavin standing in front of a small house in Tallahassee. He was handing keys to the same woman. The third document was a birth certificate. Father Gavin Michael Black, Mother Sarah Jenkins. Child Gavin Black Jr., date of birth 2 years ago. LaToya stared at the photos. Her brain refused to process the images. Who is this? She whispered. Who is that baby? That is his son, I said brutally. And that is his other wife. Or at least the woman he told he was going to marry once his old nagging wife got her inheritance. Gavin stopped struggling against the officer. He went completely still. He didn't look at the photos. He looked at the floor. He has a second family, LaToya, I said, my voice hard and unforgiving. He didn't just steal my money to gamble. He stole it to support them. He paid for that house in Florida with the money he siphoned from my retirement account. He paid for that woman's car with the credit cards he opened in your name. He wasn't trying to build a future for you. He was building an escape hatch. LaToya picked up the birth certificate. Her hands were trembling so hard the paper made a rattling sound. 2 years ago, she whispered. You were in Florida for a business trip. You said you were at a conference. Gavin didn't answer. And the money, she said, her voice rising an octave, the money we stole from my father, the money we were going to get from the land. You were going to take it to them, weren't you? Gavin looked up. His eyes were cold, dead things. She treats me like a king, he said softly. She doesn't nag me. She doesn't complain. And she isn't the daughter of a railroad worker. She appreciates me. The scream that tore out of LaToya's throat was not human. It was the sound of a woman whose entire reality had just shattered into a million razor-sharp pieces. She didn't cry. She lunged. She moved faster than the officers anticipated. She flew across the room, her fingers curled into claws. She hit Gavin with the force of a freight train. She didn't slap him. She went for his eyes. You bastard, she screamed, tearing at his face. You dirty, lying bastard. I killed my father for you. I left my daughter for you. Gavin yelled in pain as her nails raked down his cheek, drawing deep lines of blood. He tried to defend himself, but his hands were cuffed behind his back. He stumbled backward, crashing into the china cabinet. Plates shattered around them. LaToya was on top of him, biting, kicking, screaming primal obscenities. Get her off me! Gavin shouted, kicking out with his legs. She is crazy! The officers rushed in, trying to pull them apart. It was a chaotic, violent tangle of limbs and shouting. They dragged LaToya away, but she kept kicking her heels, connecting with Gavin's shins. Her dress was torn, her hair was wild, and her face was twisted into a mask of pure hate. "He has a baby," she screamed, spitting at him. "He has a son." They dragged them out the front door and onto the porch. The neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the police lights and the noise. Mrs. Higgins from next door was filming with her phone. Mr. Henderson across the street was watching with his mouth open. They saw the perfect couple, the couple that looked down on everyone, the couple that drove luxury cars and wore designer clothes rolling in the dirt. LaToya broke free from the officer for a split second and lunged at Gavin again, kicking him in the groin. Gavin doubled over, groaning, falling onto the grass. I watched from the doorway, holding Tiana's hand. She had come out of the bedroom when the screaming started. I tried to shield her eyes, but she pushed my hand away. She watched her parents destroy each other. She didn't look scared, she looked disappointed. "Look at them," I told her quietly. "Look at what greed does. Look at what lies do. They are not kings and queens, Tiana. They are animals." The police finally managed to separate them. They shoved Gavin into the back of one cruiser and LaToya into another. They had to park the cars 50 feet apart because they were still screaming threats at each other through the windows. I stepped out onto the porch. The air was silent now, except for the crackle of the police radios. The neighbors stared at me. They saw the old man they had ignored for years, standing tall on his porch, while the young, successful couple was hauled away in chains. I nodded to Mrs. Higgins. She lowered her phone. "Show is over," I said. I looked at the police cars. I looked at the daughter I had raised, who was now just a stranger in the back of a cage. I felt a deep, profound sadness, but underneath it was relief. The cancer had been cut out. It was messy, it was painful, and it left a scar, but the body could finally start to heal. I turned to Mrs. Harrison. "Is it done?" I asked. She closed her briefcase. The snap of the latch sounded like a gavel coming down. "It is done," she said. "The assets are seized, the charges are filed, and the custody order is signed." "They are gone, Ezekiel." I looked down at Tiana. "Are you okay, baby?" I asked. She looked up at me. Her eyes were clear. "Can we have pancakes now?" she asked. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt on my face in a week. "Yes," I said. "We can have all the pancakes you want." I took her hand and we walked back inside, closing the door on the chaos, closing the door on the past. The house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of peace. We had a lot of work to do. We had a life to rebuild, but we had the foundation, and we had the truth, and that was all we needed. The chaos on my front lawn had settled into a tense standoff. Gavin and LaToya were separated by the officers, panting and bleeding, their expensive clothes stained with grass and dirt. They looked like cornered animals waiting for the cage to close. I stood on the porch, my hand resting on the railing, feeling the cold night air fill my lungs. I thought I had shielded Tiana from the worst of it. I thought she was still safe inside the house, away from the violence of her parents' collapse. But then I felt a small hand slip into mine. I looked down. Tiana was standing beside me. She was wearing her winter coat and her boots, which I had bought for her the day before. She wasn't hiding behind my leg. She wasn't crying. She was standing tall, her chin lifted, staring directly at the two people who had given her life and then tried to throw it away. "Tiana, go back inside," I said gently. "You do not need to see this." "No, Grandpa," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I need to see them." LaToya looked up from the grass where she was being held by a deputy. When she saw Tiana, her face twisted into a mask of desperate manipulation. "Baby," she cried, struggling against the officer's grip. "Tiana, baby, tell them. Tell them Mommy loves you. Tell them it was a mistake. We came back for you. We came back to save you." Gavin spat blood onto the grass. "Tell the truth, Tiana," he growled. "Tell them you ran away. Tell them you hid in the shed." I felt Tiana's hand tighten around mine. She didn't flinch at his voice. She didn't shrink away. She took a step forward to the edge of the porch steps so she could look down at them. "I didn't run away," Tiana said. "You dragged me." LaToya sobbed. "No, baby, no. We love you. We are a family. You are not my family," Tiana said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the night air like a knife. "Family doesn't leave you in the cold. Family doesn't take Grandpa's medicine away." She pointed a small finger at Gavin. You told me I was garbage, she said. You said I was expensive and loud and you wished I had never been born. You put me in the dark and you laughed. Gavin's face turned purple. You ungrateful little brat, he shouted, lunging forward only to be jerked back by the handcuffs. I fed you. I clothed you. You starved me, Tiana corrected him. And you stole from Grandpa. She turned her gaze to LaToya. And you watched, she said. You stood on the porch and you drank your wine and you watched him lock the door. You didn't say stop. You didn't say no. You just fixed your lipstick. LaToya wailed a sound of pure misery. Tiana, please. I was scared. You weren't scared, Tiana said. You were greedy. I heard you talking about the money. I heard you say you wanted Grandpa to die so you could buy a boat. The neighbors who were still watching from the sidewalk gasped. The truth from a child's mouth has a weight that no lawyer can replicate. It is pure, it is unvarnished, and it is devastating. I don't want to go with you, Tiana said, finalizing her judgment. I don't want to be your daughter anymore. You are not parents. You are monsters. You are devils. She turned her back on them. She looked up at me. I am staying with Grandpa, she said. He is my dad now. I squeezed her hand, trying to hold back the tears that pricked my eyes. She had done the hardest thing a child can do. She had severed the cord. She had chosen survival over blood. Sheriff Miller stepped into the center of the yard. He looked at me and nodded. It was time. He pulled a folded document from his vest pocket. He walked over to Gavin first. He didn't offer him any courtesy. He grabbed Gavin by the shoulder and forced him to look at him. Gavin Black, the sheriff said, his voice booming. You are under arrest. For what? Gavin screamed. For disciplining my child. For borrowing money. The sheriff began to read from the warrant. Count 1, aggravated child abuse and endangerment. Count 2, grand larceny. Count 3, forgery in the first degree. Count 4, wire fraud. Gavin laughed hysterically. Is that it? I will get bail in an hour. I am not finished, the sheriff said. He leaned closer to Gavin. Count 5, conspiracy to commit murder. Count 6, adulteration of prescription medication with intent to harm. Gavin stopped laughing. The color drained from his face, leaving him gray and ashen. We have the pills, Gavin, the sheriff said. We have the toxicology report. We have the receipt for the pill press you bought. And we have the witness testimony of the child you tried to freeze to death. You aren't getting bail. You are going to federal prison. Gavin looked at me. He looked at the house. He looked at the life he had destroyed. This is a mistake, he whispered. I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted him to sleep. That is a confession, the sheriff said to the deputy. Mark the time. Get him in the car. They dragged Gavin toward the cruiser. He didn't walk. He had to be carried, his legs giving out under the weight of his reality. The sheriff turned to LaToya. She was still on her knees, weeping into the grass. LaToya Black, stand up, he ordered. I didn't do anything, she sobbed. It was all him. I just wanted to go on vacation. You are under arrest, the sheriff said, pulling her to her feet. Count 1, accessory to attempted murder. Count 2, child neglect resulting in great bodily harm. Count 3, conspiracy to defraud. Me, she shrieked. I didn't switch the pills. I didn't lock the door. But you knew, the sheriff said. You knew he did it. You knew your daughter was in that shed. You knew your father was being poisoned. And you got on a plane. In the eyes of the law, silence is complicity. You watched a crime happen and you profited from it. That makes you just as guilty as the man who held the weapon. They cuffed her hands behind her back. She looked at me, her eyes wild with panic. Daddy, help me, she screamed. Daddy, tell them I am your little girl. You can't let them take me. I am sorry. I will pay it back. I will do anything. I looked at her. I saw the daughter I had raised. I saw the little girl I had taught to ride a bike. I saw the woman who had walked down the aisle in a white dress. But that woman was gone. She had been consumed by greed. The person standing on my lawn was a stranger. I said nothing. Put her in the car, the sheriff said. They led her away. She screamed my name over and over again until the car door slammed shut, cutting off her voice. Gavin was in the other car. He was thrashing against the window, kicking the glass, screaming threats that were muffled by the safety glass. You will pay for this, old man, he mouthed. I will kill you. I will burn this house down. I stood on the porch holding Tiana's hand and I watched them. I did not yell back. I did not curse them. I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing me angry. I gave them something much worse. I gave them my silence. Silence is the ultimate judgment. It says that you are not worth my words. You are not worth my breath. You are beneath my anger. You are simply gone. The sheriff walked up to the porch. He tipped his hat to me. It is done, Zeke, he said. The DA is pushing for maximum sentences. With the evidence you gave us, Gavin is looking at 25 years minimum. LaToya will likely get 10 to 15. Thank you, Miller, I said. What about the girl, he asked, looking at Tiana. She is home, I said. She isn't going anywhere. The sheriff nodded. He walked back to his car. The blue lights swirled one last time, illuminating the neighborhood. Then the cars pulled away, driving slowly down the street, taking the darkness with them. The neighbors began to disperse, whispering among themselves. They had seen the show. They had seen the fall of the House of Black. I looked down at Tiana. She was shivering slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. Come on, baby, I said. Let's go inside. She looked up at me. Grandpa, she said, are they gone forever? Yes, I said. They are gone. We walked into the house and I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt not out of fear, but out of finality. I walked to the kitchen and turned on the stove. I got out the flour, the milk, and the eggs. I promised you pancakes, I said. Tiana climbed onto a stool at the island. She watched me mix the batter. Grandpa, she asked, why did they do it? Why did they want the money so bad? I stopped whisking. I looked at her. Because they forgot what was important, Tiana, I said. They thought money could buy happiness. They didn't know that happiness is built with your hands, not bought with a card. They were empty inside, baby, and empty people try to fill themselves with things. She nodded slowly as if she understood more than any child should have to. I won't be empty, Grandpa, she said. I know you won't, I said. Because you have me, and I have you, and we have Odessa watching over us. I poured the batter onto the griddle. The smell of cooking pancakes filled the kitchen, chasing away the lingering scent of Gavin's cologne and LaToya's perfume. The house felt lighter. The air felt cleaner. The cancer had been cut out. We were scarred, yes. We were wounded. But we were still standing. And as the sun fully rose outside, shining through the window onto the kitchen table, I knew that we were going to be all right. We had the land. We had the truth. And most importantly, we had each other. The nightmare was over. The morning had finally come. 3 years is a long time to sit in a room with no windows, but it is not long enough to cure a rot that has eaten into the soul. I drove to the state correctional facility for women with the windows down, letting the Georgia heat fill the truck. I wasn't going there to forgive. I wasn't going there to reconcile. I was going there because I needed to see it for myself. I needed to look into the eyes of the woman who used to be my daughter and make sure that the monster was truly caged. The prison visiting room was a bleak box of gray concrete and scratched plexiglass. It smelled of industrial cleaner and misery. I sat on the metal stool, my back straight, my hands folded on the ledge. When the guard brought LaToya out, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman who walked toward the glass wasn't the high-maintenance socialite who demanded first-class tickets and designer purses. She was a shell. Her hair, once chemically straightened and dyed to perfection, was growing out in patchy clumps of gray and wiry black. Her skin was sallow, deprived of sunlight and expensive creams. She had lost weight, but not in a healthy way. She looked gaunt, hollowed out from the inside. She sat down and picked up the phone. Her hands were rough, her nails bitten down to the quick. She looked at me, and for a second I saw a flash of the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders. But then she spoke, and the illusion shattered. "Did you sell it?" she asked. "No, hello?" "No, how are you, Daddy?" "No, how is Tiana? Just the money." It was always the money. "Hello, LaToya," I said, my voice flat. "Answer me," she hissed, pressing her forehead against the glass. "Did you sell the land as the money in the trust?" "When do I get out of here, Daddy? My lawyer says if you write a letter to the parole board saying it was a misunderstanding, they might let me go early. I have done 3 years. That is enough." I looked at her and I felt a profound coldness settle over me. 3 years in a cage and she hadn't learned a single thing. She still thought this was a transaction. She still thought her freedom was something she could negotiate. "I didn't sell the land," I said. "I leased it. The checks come in every month, LaToya, $500,000 a year just for the rights to the ground, plus the signing bonus. It is a lot of money." Her eyes lit up a hungry, desperate light that made her look feral. "See," she said, a smile stretching across her thin face. "We are rich, You can hire a better lawyer. You can get me out. I will sign whatever you want. I will stay away from Gavin. Just get me out and give me my share. I am your daughter. I have rights." "You have no rights," I said, cutting her off. "You lost your rights when you left my granddaughter to die in the cold." I leaned closer to the glass. "The money isn't yours, LaToya. It never was. It all goes into the trust. Every single dime. And do you know who controls that trust?" "You do," she said, confused. "No," I said. "Tiana does. Well, her board of trustees does until she is 25. But she sees the statements. She knows exactly how much she is worth. And she knows exactly why you are in here." LaToya's face crumpled. She slammed her hand against the glass. "You gave it to her," she screamed. "She is a child. She doesn't need millions. I need it. I am rotting in here. Look at me, Daddy. I am dying." "You are not dying," I said, standing up. "You are just living the life you paid for. You bought this cell with your greed, LaToya, and the rent is due every single day." I hung up the phone. I didn't say goodbye. I watched her scream silently behind the glass, mouthing obscenities, cursing me, cursing Tiana, cursing the world. She looked ugly, not because of the prison uniform, but because the mask was gone. I walked away without looking back. I left her there with her rage and her poverty. She was exactly where she belonged. The drive back was quiet, but my mind was on the other half of the equation. Gavin. I didn't visit Gavin. I didn't need to see him to know he was broken. Mrs. Harrison kept tabs on him through her contacts in the federal system. The reports were satisfying in a brutal, biblical sort of way. Gavin hadn't fared well in federal prison. He had walked in with his nose in the air, telling the other inmates he was a high-finance investor who was in for white-collar crimes. He tried to act superior. He tried to boss people around like he bossed me around. It didn't last a week. Mrs. Harrison told me the story. Gavin had insulted the wrong man, a lifer who didn't care about Bitcoin or stock options. Gavin had called him uneducated. The lesson that followed was physical and permanent. Gavin's leg had been broken in 3 places. He walked with a cane, now a permanent limp that matched the limp in his character. He had lost 2 front teeth. The handsome, arrogant face that had charmed my daughter and fooled me for years was now scarred and lumpy. Yesterday I had received a letter from him. It was written on cheap prison stationery in pencil. I hadn't opened it immediately. I had let it sit on the kitchen counter next to the fruit bowl while I made breakfast for Tiana. I picked it up later that evening. I opened it carefully. Zeke read the handwriting, shaky and weak. "Please, I am begging you. Talk to the DA. Tell them I was under duress. Tell them LaToya made me do it. I can't stay here. They are going to kill me. I am a good man, Zeke. I just made a mistake. We are family. Please help me." I read it twice. Then I walked to the fireplace. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel a surge of mercy. I remembered the white pills. I remembered the shed. I remembered him laughing on the plane while he thought I was dying. He wasn't sorry he did it. He was sorry he got caught. He was sorry he was hurting. I tossed the letter into the flames. I watched the paper curl and blacken. I watched his desperate words turn into ash and float up the chimney. "I am not the judge, Gavin," I whispered to the fire. "I am just the witness." I sat down at my desk and wrote a check to Mrs. Harrison. It was for her retainer for the next 5 years. I wanted to make sure that every time Gavin came up for parole, every time he filed a motion for early release, there was a shark in a suit standing there to push him back down. He wanted to play the legal game. I was going to make sure he played it until he was an old man. Walking out of the prison that day felt different than I expected. I thought I would feel heavy, burdened by the sight of my daughter in a cage. But as I stepped through the heavy steel doors and into the bright Georgia sunshine, I felt something else entirely. I felt light. For years I had lived with a weight on my chest, the weight of suspicion, the weight of knowing that the people living under my roof didn't love me, the weight of protecting my assets from my own blood. It was a cancer, a slow-growing tumor that had eaten away at my peace. Now it was gone. The surgery had been radical. It had been bloody. I had to cut off a limb to save the body, but I had survived. I walked to my truck, my boots crunching on the gravel. I looked up at the sky. It was a deep, endless blue. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that didn't smell of betrayal. I had lost a daughter, yes, But in reality, I had lost her years ago. I had lost her to greed, to vanity, to the poison Gavin whispered in her ear. The woman in that cell wasn't the child I raised. She was a stranger who shared my DNA. But I had saved something precious. I had saved Tiana. I got into the truck and started the engine. The radio came on, playing an old blues song Odessa used to love. I smiled. I wasn't an old man waiting to die anymore. I was a guardian. I was a trustee. I was a grandfather with a job to do. I put the truck in gear and drove away from the razor wire and the guard towers. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there for me. My future was waiting at home, sitting at the kitchen table doing her homework, probably wondering if we could get ice cream after dinner. And the answer was yes. We could get ice cream. We could get anything we wanted, because the parasites were gone and the host was finally healthy again. I drove toward the horizon, toward the land, toward the legacy, leaving the prison and the past in the dust where they belonged. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, damp from the rain and stamped with the unmistakable seal of the state correctional facility. I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of the paper and the weight of the past trying to claw its way back into our present. It was addressed to Tiana, but per the court order, all correspondence had to go through me first. I sat at the kitchen island, the same island where I used to drink coffee alone, and sliced open the envelope. LaToya's handwriting had deteriorated. It was jagged and rushed, much like Gavin's used to be. I read the words and felt a familiar coldness settle in my stomach. It was not a letter of apology. It was a letter of manipulation. She wrote about how much she missed Tiana, how she cried every night looking at the moon, and how she had knitted a scarf she wasn't allowed to send. She wrote that she was taking classes on parenting. She wrote that everyone makes mistakes and that God forgives, so Tiana should too. She asked for a visit. Just one visit. She said she needed to explain her side of the story because she knew Grandpa had poisoned Tiana's mind. She was still doing it. Even from a concrete cell, she was trying to gaslight a child. She took no responsibility. She showed no true remorse. She only wanted an audience. I heard footsteps behind me. Tiana walked into the kitchen dressed for school. She was taller now, her hair braided neatly, her face filling out with the health that comes from 3 years of peace and good food. She saw the letter in my hand. She stopped. "Is that from her?" she asked. She didn't call LaToya Mom anymore. She just called her her. "Yes," I said. "She wants to see you. She says she has changed." Tiana walked over and took the letter from my hand. She didn't read it immediately. She looked at the return address. She looked at the stamp. Then she scanned the page, her eyes moving quickly over the desperate scrawled lies. Her expression didn't change. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble like she used to when she heard her mother's voice. She walked to the fireplace in the living room where the morning logs were burning bright and hot to keep the winter chill at bay. I followed her quietly. Tiana stood before the flames holding the paper by the corner. "She says she knitted me a scarf," Tiana said, her voice flat. I remember when I asked her to zip my coat because my hands were cold and she told me to stop being a baby. I remember when she bought herself a fur coat and told me I had to wait until next year for new boots. She crumpled the letter into a ball. "She doesn't want to see me," Grandpa Tiana said, turning to look at me. "She wants to see if I am still broken. She wants to see if she can still trick me. She wants to know if there is a crack in the door so she can sneak back in when she gets out." She tossed the paper ball into the fire. We watched it catch. The edges blackened and curled. The ink evaporated. The lies turned to ash and floated up the chimney, disappearing into the cold Georgia sky. "I don't need her," Tiana said, watching the fire. "I don't need her explanations. I know what happened. I was there." She walked over to me and wrapped her arms around my waist, burying her face in my flannel shirt. "I only have you, Grandpa," she whispered. "You are my family. You are my dad. You are everything." I held her tight, resting my chin on her head. "And you are everything to me," I said. We stood there for a long moment watching the last of the embers fade. The past was truly gone now. LaToya had tried to reach out from her grave of a life and pull us back in, but Tiana had built a wall of self-worth that no manipulation could breach. She was free. And so was I. Life looks very different now. 3 years have passed since the trial, and the world has turned in ways I never expected. Tiana is 10 years old, and she is terrifyingly smart. She is not just surviving, she is thriving. We moved out of the old house, the one with the bad memories and the drafty windows. We didn't sell it. I rented it out to a nice young couple who are fixing it up. We built a new house on the edge of the 50-acre plot, the land that Gavin tried to steal. It is a modern house with solar panels, thick insulation, and a security system that rivals Fort Knox. It is warm. It is always warm. I made sure of that. Tiana has a room with a view of the forest and a desk where she spends her evenings. She isn't playing with dolls, she is learning Python and Java. She sits at her computer, her eyes focused typing lines of code that look like magic to me. She told me she wants to understand how the data center next door works. She wants to understand the systems that run the world because she never wants to be powerless again. Grandpa, she told me the other day looking up from her tablet, did you know that the lease revenue from the data center is indexed to inflation? If the economy crashes, we are still safe. I laughed. At 10 years old, I was worrying about baseball cards. She is worrying about macroeconomics. I hired a tutor for her, a finance professor from the university who comes twice a week. He tells me she has a natural aptitude for asset management. She asks questions about trust structures and tax liabilities. She is preparing. She knows that one day she will be the steward of this legacy, and she treats that responsibility with a gravity that makes me proud and a little sad. She grew up too fast, but she grew up strong. We have a routine. We cook dinner together every night. No more frozen meals. We make stew, we make roast chicken, we make salads from the garden we planted out back. We talk, we laugh. The silence that used to fill my life is gone, replaced by the sound of a child discovering the world. Sometimes I see her looking out the window at the massive server farm that Apex Data built on the south side of our land. It hums quietly, a giant machine of glass and steel that generates the money that keeps us safe. She doesn't see a building. She sees her future. She is happy. That is the most important thing. She has friends at her private school. She plays soccer. She sleeps through the night without nightmares. The frozen girl in the shed is gone, replaced by a young queen in the making. And I am just the old knight polishing her armor, making sure she is ready for the day she has to ride out on her own. On Sunday evening, after Tiana had gone to bed, I went to my study. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my new mahogany desk and pulled out the metal box. It was the same rusty box Tiana had found in the shed, the box that had saved our lives. It was cleaner now. I had wiped away the dirt and oil, but I hadn't painted it. I wanted to remember the rust. I wanted to remember where it came from. I sat in my leather chair and opened the lid. The deed was gone, moved to a bank vault. The forged notebook was gone, locked in evidence at the courthouse. The box was empty except for the smell of cedar and memory. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a photograph I had taken last week. It was a picture of Tiana and me standing on the porch of our new house. The sun was setting behind us, casting a golden glow over the land. I was looking at the camera, my arm around her shoulder. She was beaming her smile wide and genuine, her eyes crinkled with joy. She looked safe. She looked loved. I placed the photo inside the metal box. It was the only thing in there. The new treasure. I looked up at the portrait of Odessa hanging on the wall above my desk. I had commissioned a local artist to paint it from the small photo I had saved from the frame Latoya broke. In the painting, Odessa looked radiant, her hat tilted just so her eyes full of that secret wisdom she always carried. I spoke to her, my voice soft in the quiet room. "You see that, Odessa?" I said, gesturing to the box. I did it. I held the line. I rubbed my hand over the cool metal lid. "You were right about the land," I said. "And you were right about the weeds. I had to pull them up, Odessa. I had to pull them up by the roots. It was hard work. It broke my back and it broke my heart, but I did it." I looked at the photo of Tiana one last time before closing the lid. "The garden is clean now," I whispered. "The soil is good. And the best seed we ever planted is finally growing. She is going to be tall, Odessa. She is going to be a giant." I closed the box and locked it. I put it back in the drawer. The weeds were gone. Gavin and Latoya were memories fading in the rearview mirror of our lives. They were lessons, not family. I turned off the lamp and walked out of the study. I checked the front door. Locked. I checked the alarm. Armed. I walked down the hall and peeked into Tiana's room. She was asleep, hugging a new teddy bear. I stood there for a moment, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. It was the sound of victory. I went to my own room and lay down. For the first time in 40 years, I didn't worry about the future. The future was sleeping in the next room, and she was magnificent. I closed my eyes and let the sleep take me, knowing that when I woke up, the house would still be warm, the money would still be there, and my granddaughter would still be mine. The storm had passed, and the harvest was just beginning. Did you like my story? Let me know in the comments if you think justice was served. If you believe in protecting your family at all costs, Hit like and subscribe. There are more stories to tell, and trust me, the truth is always stranger than fiction. See you in the next video. I learned that family is not defined by whose blood runs in your veins, but by whose hand holds yours when the storm comes. Gavin and LaToya proved that greed is a poison that turns kin into strangers. They chased a fortune they didn't earn and lost the only things that actually mattered: freedom and family. My duty wasn't to enable their corruption, but to protect the innocent life they tried to discard. True legacy isn't about leaving money behind. It is about instilling values that survive you. I had to prune the rot from my family tree so the healthy branch could thrive. It was a painful amputation, but it saved the patient. If you think I made the right choice by choosing my granddaughter over my daughter, let me know in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe justice should always be served cold.